So let's start with the pledges of allegiance. Next, we have the minutes from the July 5th meeting. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
A second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. Next, we've got a little bit of a quorum issue, so we're going to juggle the schedule a little bit. So there are 5 of us now. Charlie is going to be recusing himself for your application and 800 Goshen Road. We do have another member who is on the way, who will be here a few minutes late. So what I'm going to do is switch around, and we're going to listen to the PLO first. I hope that doesn't mess up anybody's schedule. I apologize if it does, but all these cancellations kind of came at the last minute. Steve, can you, I'm sorry, thanks, Skip. We have one more issue.
Is Don Curley intending to be here for the PLO?
I don't know. He doesn't hear.
Is Commissioner Curley planning to attend? Does anybody know? No.
Okay. Before we get started with that, though, I do want to discuss a procedural matter with John relative to 800 Goshen Road. As I understand it, they're here to do a presentation this evening, and this is a plan that was denied previously, and it was part of a development approval that it would remain as open space, yet they're trying to develop it. I guess I don't see the reason, with all due respect, to hear the application if the township's position is it can't be developed because it was part of open space from another development that they did get approval on. Could you give us some guidance as to how we should handle that?
Steve, I think I have to recuse myself for this one also, or?
You do, but I wanted to get legal opinion first.
Okay.
Okay?
I think the way I would handle this, you have a letter that I sent to the landowners' council regarding what the township's position is, and the landowner has been aware of that position for at least 7 years or more, at least as far back as I've been township solicitor in '09. So they've chosen, and they were advised back then that if they wanted to develop that lot, they would have to file or make a request to remove that note on that plan. So I'm assuming that's why they have filed this 3-lot subdivision plan. There was a previous plan to build a single home on that lot, which never advanced, ended up in front of the zoning hearing board on a grading permit. But you know, what's squarely in front of you tonight is this application. We didn't think we could just not accept the application. So I would not spend a vast amount of time on this. You do have 2 review letters, and there are saldo provisions in there, at least one ordinance provision that says that open space can't be developed. But I would not get into the weeds on this application other than to let the applicant have his say on how he intends to address the review letters and the fact that there's a 1998 plan which has a note on Lot 9 which says that it is open space. So, I mean, beyond that, you can make a recommendation, you can table it. Ultimately, it's going to end up in front of the Board of Commissioners. If not this month, next month, and then they'll make a final decision on it. But I don't know what the applicant's plan is in terms of addressing the review letters or that note on the plan. So, but I don't think it's productive for the Planning Commission to do anything other than to listen to what the applicant has to say. They have the right to do that. It's a formal application. There'll be some formal action on it at some point, and I suspect it'll be litigated on a couple different levels.
Thank you. With that in mind, then, we obviously will hear 800. Goshen, and if whoever's presenting for the PLO, is that you, Steve? Or Kevin? We're going to switch the order around, Kevin, because we're short a board member. We're waiting for Regina to come in. Charlie's going to recuse himself on the other two applicants, so we're going to go PLO first.
Okay.
So, are you presenting on PLO? Or? Steve, are you presenting on the PLO? No? Okay.
From last month.
Steve, I know Commissioner Curley is not here tonight. I believe he is out of town. You were afforded the version that you were to, that we started to look at last month. So I think if you could pick up your discussion for, from that standpoint of the ordinance provisions as it was presented in Commissioner Curley's draft, and that can spur some dialogue and we can move forward from there. Get a recommendation on what was presented to you from Commissioner Curley, and that can go back up to the board at their next meeting.
Okay, that's fine. What we will do, thanks. I see. So Regina did come in, so we will go with the original order. And when it comes to PLO, we're just going to go and comment on the review letters. So please present.
Thank you. My name is Lowry Shantz. I represent the Radnor Apartments on Bryn Mawr Avenue. It's a 40-plus acre site. We've got slightly over 450 apartments. We've been working with the township and with the township engineers. We're looking to add a storage building on that site of approximately 2,400 square feet. And we plan momentarily to dismantle an existing, let's call it a swimming pool community building, which dates back 40-plus years, and take that apart and come back with a new modern swimming pool building which accommodates what people are looking for in today's world, which is more than just a changing room and a place to store the chlorine. All of our work from an engineering standpoint is handled by Mr. Dan Popowell, who has had a number of exchanges with the township consultants. We've tried to address as many things as we can. And at this point, I'm going to turn the rest of this meeting on our behalf over to Mr. Popowell for the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. So the application...
Just state your name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dan Popowell with Nepo Associates Incorporated. The basis for our application is a storage building which is shown on the left-hand side of our drawings, or the western side of the property. It's really going to be used for the storage of seasonal equipment, lawn mowers, snow blowers, snow plows. There will be no restroom facilities or office space within this. It's strictly just a storage building. It'll be a single grade building. The second building, as Larry spoke of, is replacing the existing pool house, which is internal on the property, really right about in the center of the property. We're building this building on top of the old, or on top of the foundation of the old pool house, and we're going to, it'll have some facilities for residents' recreation or pool parties. It'll have, potentially have a weight room or little workout facility, larger restroom facilities in it, be ADA compliant as opposed to what it is today. So as Larry also said, we've met with the township on a number of different occasions. We're proposing some stormwater because I know there's a lot of problems. This facility was built prior to any stormwater ordinances. So our concepts right now are to infiltrate stormwater very close to where the pool house is, and then also construct a larger rain garden down right along Bryn Mawr Avenue. So that's the basis of our application. We did request a waiver if we could combine our preliminary and final final processes together. We asked that because there are no public improvements. It really is a relatively small application, and so we do want to make a note of our request for a waiver.
Okay, great. Have you seen the review letter?
I have, yes.
Okay, and are there any items on the review letter that you will not comply with?
No, we'll comply with that letter entirely.
Okay. That was both letters. I guess Amy had a few questions, more than necessarily comply or will comply.
Yeah.
Let me just check with her letter. Her letter handy.
I believe she only had 4 comments or 5 comments, mostly just,
And then, well, the one specifically I remember was the walkway between the mulch area and the proposed pool house. Is there going to be one, or
I'm sorry?
the mulch play area and the proposed pool house? Is there going to be a walkway?
Not a concrete, we're not anticipating a concrete walkway at this
Okay.
time, because the play area, the mulch play area is directly to the rear.
Right.
And we really have to expand that play area a little bit, just to keep it in the same size it is today. We don't really have the architecturals for the pool house yet. We're trying to we're just putting the land development ahead of it before we go out for a request for proposals from an architectural firm. There may be a door that leads directly through the pool house back into the play area. Those kind of details we really haven't worked out yet.
Okay.
If there is a walkway, it would be ADA compliant. But right now, we're not really anticipating any sort of a sidewalk or anything.
Okay. Any board questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Nothing's too earth-shattering. I am looking at is the front yard of this considered to be Land Rover or Bryn Mawr Avenue?
It's both streets, I believe. The way we have our front yard setbacks is both streets.
So are you complying with the front yard setback on both? Because the plans indicate that there's a front and a rear yard to this, and to look at the plan, it looks like Landover's being considered the front yard because there are some existing apartment buildings in the front yard, and yet I would have thought the front yard was Bryn Mawr Avenue.
Yeah,
And
I'm sorry. I believe that both Bryn Mawr and Landover are front yard setbacks. The rear yard would be that little piece of property where we have C enlargement area. Right here would probably be a rear yard.
Okay.
Well,
Maybe that's why the dashes, maybe there's no considered front yard. In any event, I'm saying that more from the details of a plan standpoint. How tall did you say the shed's going to be?
I believe it's 15 feet. It's
All right.
not very tall at all.
It's hard to see on the plans, in fact, I don't see on the plans what kind of buffering there is. I think where you're planning the shed, and the reason I got confused about the front yard thing is that this is oriented backwards from what I'm used to seeing the Radwin from Bryn Mawr Avenue. So the shed's actually planned on the downhill, very close to, there's a cul-de-sac community. I can't think of the name of the street.
Yeah, it's
Birches Lane.
Birches Lane.
Yeah.
They have open space between the rear of their properties and our property line, and then we're another 100 feet from our
Okay.
property line, which is heavily wooded.
Okay,
also.
so that is heavily wooded.
Yes.
And it's not going to be, you're not going to be running machines in that building, just keeping them in there?
Yeah, it's just storage of equipment.
Okay.
Yeah, it may have electricity, but it won't have any plumbing or anything of that nature.
And it looks like you're losing a few parking spots, not too many?
Just 2, and then we're relocating them right on site.
You're relocating?
Yes.
Okay, so there was no issue with, parking wasn't an issue, was it? Okay. The proposed changes to the stormwater ordinance maintenance, they're not going to come under those proposed changes. Are they doing the things that we would have asked under the new ordinance? It's more a curiosity. We can't compel them to, but the changes you're proposing?
They're not complying with what would be the new ordinance that's not in effect yet, but they're complying with the current ordinance.
Okay. I guess I would ask the applicant to consider doing that if we're going to waive you need some minor waives of the plan, and I guess I would ask you to consider taking a look at some of our more strict requirements of the stormwater and see if you can comply with the newer ones so that it benefits Bryn Mawr Avenue. I know water coming off of that property down Bryn Mawr Avenue is a bit of an issue. The last question really has nothing to do with the plan itself, other than it's hard for me to see where the fence, for safety's sake, where the fence is around the existing pool. And with the pool house, is it going to be a situation where people or children could be inside the pool house and walk directly into the new pool area? And that raises a concern for me, particularly if you're going to have a doorway from the mulched playground area where kids could access the pool through the pool house. I don't know it's hard to tell what kind of fencing you have there
Right.
and what kind of fencing you're proposing to have. And Kevin, I'm assuming that will all get handled with permitting?
When they apply for the permits, our codes will be looking at any required fencing, whether or not
Okay.
it's required, not, I don't know, but that's, that's more the details that
Right.
get worked out.
I'm only raising it because if it comes back, if it's not final, preliminary. Was there any concern, the minimum setback between a house and a building is 15 feet? I think there's one building that's about 21. It's much closer than the others, the pool house to Building J. Did that cause anybody any concern with access for anything?
There was an existing nonconformity there, which they're lessening, but they're preserving a portion of that.
Okay.
So,
That was all my questions. Thank you.
And we'll look at that. I haven't seen your new ordinance yet. If it's strictly maintenance issues, I don't think that we'll have a problem with that whatsoever.
Thank you.
Because we do have a full-time staff, at the facility itself. And, not shown on our plans are, over the last couple of years, we have gone about and installed rain gardens and extra stormwater facilities on our site, mostly to solve problems on our site. But again, we can maintain them because there is a full-time maintenance staff here. It's not like a homeowners association where they would have to go out and contract somebody. We do have a maintenance staff on hand.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the pool house, does that have any food service in it?
It's not, it's not going to have anything that's being cooked or anything of that sort. There may be a vending machine, and that's just a little bit, excuse me, further down the road than where our thinking is at this point.
But not like a counter where you're selling hot dogs and hamburgers and things like that?
No.
Okay. Is this a facility that would be rented out to the
No,
public?
this facility, you raise a good question, is solely and strictly for the occupants who rent apartments at our complex. This is
Okay.
not something open to the public.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and back to Ms. Stern's comment about children in the clubhouse. There's constantly pool attendants there. Young children aren't permitted to be there without parents. The building will be part of a line of demarcation in addition to the fencing. We are code compliant now. I'm guessing that fencing is 48 or 52 inches. Whatever it has to be is what it is now. It will be that in the future. The pool house will be a monitored situation. So, the 4-year-old can't jump off of a swing set, run through the pool house building, and immediately be in the swimming pool. So, okay.
Regina?
So these comments that are have they been addressed already, the stormwater management comments?
No, we just received a letter last week. We haven't had a chance
I
to.
mean, you haven't coordinated on this yet?
Not yet, no.
Okay. I just don't think we could make a recommendation when there's so many outstanding issues.
Well,
I mean, it's one thing to
Yeah,
say you're going to comply, but we don't even, do you have infiltration tests performed, or did you, because a lot of these things are pretty, I mean, it's like you didn't submit any calculations whatsoever, so I don't know that the size that you have here is adequate for what you need to do.
but won't that be covered under the will comply? If it's not adequate, then they
What
have
if
to,
it doesn't fit?
then they have to increase it.
If
If
they can't comply with the comments in my letter, then it'll come back to you. I mean, your recommendation will be conditional upon them addressing the comments, and if for some reason they can't, they don't get that approval, and they'll be back.
We've also proposed facilities that are larger than what we would normally or required to be, or what we would be required to propose for these small I mean, they're very small buildings. But when we met with the township, your staff, we heard loud and clear that stormwater was a big issue. So we've gone well above what we have to do in regards to your ordinance. That's why I really I wouldn't ask for that request if I know that we're not above what we have to do, and we got to make Roger happy anyway.
Yeah, it's just a little hard to tell what's going on because it seems like you're creating berms rather than digging down, and I'm not sure if that's an outlet control structure, and what the grades are like, and whether or not you have groundwater issues. So if you have a high groundwater table, this area may not even work for a rain garden. That's the kind of thing, I mean, without some information.
Yeah, we did do perk tests out there, and we, in that particular area, right down along Bryn Mawr Ave, we don't have groundwater. We have lower perk rates, but we have perk rates that we feel comfortable enough that we can do infiltration. That area particularly is above and beyond what we would normally have to do for the 2 buildings that we're proposing, but we knew that water, it doesn't take a stormwater expert to stand out there and watch the water as it comes down Bryn Mawr Avenue and know that that's like a touchy area. I mean, there's a lot of runoff because there's no drainage even in Bryn Mawr Avenue at all. So this all sheet flows and comes onto our property, and it gave us the opportunity to provide some stormwater, and our whole concept there is going to be rain garden plants, wetland plants, and storage of water to retard whatever water we can before it leaves our site.
Well, it's good news that you know that the groundwater table is acceptable. I mean, you could always replace the material if you want to infiltrate, but when you're building berms and things like that, I don't know if that would push water that was coming onto the property out the other way, or, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, no, our grading shows that we're going to accept the water onto our property. We're going to use our lower driveway as a berm to hold the water onto our property. And this is water, it's not even our water. It comes, a large portion of it comes down Bryn Mawr Avenue. There's no curbing or stormwater facilities, storm drainage facilities in that area. So it all just kind of sheet flows, and we're going to take it onto our property and then manage it as best we can in that large area. That's a fairly large area.
Yeah, if you don't have groundwater issues, I agree. And then, so you're basically managing a lot of off-site water.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Any public comment? Can I have a seat? No public comment? All right, so the motion before us is to approve preliminary and final, provided the applicant complies with all of our review letters. Is there a motion?
Second? I think you just did a motion.
I think I did, yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Next is 800, right, Goshen Road? 800 Goshen Road.
I'm John Snyder from Saul Ewing, and I'm here just preliminarily and very quickly so that we're not taking up a lot of time on it, just to give you a little history. Because I think that notwithstanding what you have from your solicitor, that it behooves us to let you know why we're here with this application and why we feel so fervently that this is a developable lot. I represented Mr. Holloway in 1997, 98, and 2005 with respect to this property. This property was a lot averaging property. It wasn't a density modification property. Lot averaging properties have no required open space. All of the area is lotted out into lots. The interesting piece or fact with this piece was that that lower portion right off of Goshen Road near the creek had an access problem. If you remember, there was a very sharp curve as you came down to the bottom of the hill before it was corrected. There was a very big hump in the bridge over the creek, and there was a sight distance issue. So the issue was we were going to move forward with the rest of the property and leave that as undeveloped property until those issues got resolved. For that reason, the subdivision plans back in 97 and 98 provided all the grading, all the proposed buildings, all of the improvements that you would normally see on a subdivision plan for lots 1 through 8 and left lot 9 alone. When we came through and we got approval, there was an initial resolution, proposed resolution from the township that requested a deed restriction on lot 9. We did not agree to that because it's always been a developable parcel for us. That was proposed deed restriction number 13. When we said no, we would not agree to that, the board revised the proposed resolution, and you'll see in that packet, I'm trying to get this so I can get to it a little easier. The resolution in that packet that was actually passed by the Board of Supervisors, signed by the Board of Supervisors, signed by Mr. Holloway, removed that proposed condition number 13. The plans were then moved to final, and as they were presented for signature, our engineer, knowing that lot 9 wasn't intended to be built upon at that point in time, put the word open space below lot 9. We were concerned about that, and the very first thing you'll see in that packet is we went to the township solicitor and said, we're not going to have a problem with this later, otherwise we need to change it now. And the letter we received from the township solicitor said that that designation of open space didn't restrict the property, that it wasn't restricted against future use or development. It just meant that we had to come in with the additional information when we were ready to develop it. Based upon and in reliance upon your solicitor's letter, we then recorded that plan. As we move forward, we got more comments about the word open space, so we figured that when we then went through with the homeowner's declaration, which is that declaration plat is in fact a subdivision under the law, and we presented that declaration plat, which is the plan you see, in 2004, 2005. It was discussed in front of the board, the removal of that word open space, those two words open space. They were removed. It was re-signed by the township, re-signed by the board, re-signed by the Delaware County Planning Commission, and recorded as the declaration plat with no restriction on it. So just as a little background so that you understand it and don't think that you have some people here trying to pull a fast one. Our intention from 1997, 1998 on has always been to develop that parcel. We've paid taxes on it as a building lot. The assessment numbers on it are on that declaration plat you see. It's not restricted in any way. There's nothing recorded that restricts it, no easement that restrict it, other than one that we put on subsequent to all of this with our neighbors that we back up to. We put a 60-foot non-clearance restriction on our property voluntarily with them some time ago, but this basically remains as lot 9. The only thing I'll point out, and this is an example of how this happens. If you think of Ardrossan, now Ardrossan's a little different. Ardrossan has required open space. So something called open space on the Ardrossan plan it's there because it's a density modification plan and has required open space. We had to figure out what to call the non-residentially approved areas that weren't lots and weren't open space. We coined the phrase then NRA, not residentially approved parcels, partially because we had lived through this where this was labeled open space despite the letter we had from the township solicitor, and we see this as no different than those parcels. It's not restricted by law or by any recorded document. So that's why we're here. That's my speech at the start of it, and I'll let Mr. Falcone and the township engineer go through the review letters with you, unless you have any questions for me. Thank you.
I'm much shorter than John, so the microphone is much easier to accommodate me. So this will be a little less interesting than that presentation, but nevertheless, we'll get through it with y'all. So we got our letter from Roger and from Amy and also from the County Planning Commission. So what we'd like to do, just in an effort to keep this moving, we certainly understand there are other issues, and Roger leads into them, and you just heard them from John, but we'd like to go through the actual comments to the plan from your engineer and get your feedback on those comments, as would a normal application, so that we can at least continue the process from our perspective from a development, and then let the other issues be handled as they may in the appropriate form. So if that's acceptable.
We can discuss it among the board. We're kind of reluctant in light of the advice we have from our counsel.
Sure.
We heard what your attorney said. We don't want to preside over this.
Right.
I have no intention of doing it.
We agree, Steve.
Yeah. We also know that, there could be a modification. You might wind up with one or two instead of three. It may change the plan. We just don't. I respect your interest in keeping it moving forward and the rights you feel like you have, which you may have. But I just feel like this is a total waste of time for everyone in the room.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I mean, the one thing that I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Falcone is what parts of these letters can't you comply with? Instead of there's a lot of comments in Roger's letter, what parts of those
That's what we were going to try and...
are you asking waivers on and can't you
That's our goal
comply with?
tonight.
I think that, other than back and forth and a discussion,
Right.
this should all be a one-way conversation from Mr. Falcone to the rest of us about what they can comply with. Because the issue of whether they can build anything on there isn't going to be decided by this Planning Commission and probably not by the Board of Commissioners ultimately. So,
And we don't disagree with that. So we don't disagree with that.
So what
Our goal
can't-
is,
so what
and
can't you
Jeremy will
comply
be the
with?
one to walk through Roger's letter, and there's a couple. And I think it would be helpful, though, because we do have some questions on a few comments on how they're applicable to know whether or not we can apply or can comply. But for the most part, these are will comply comments. So I agree, we won't belabor those, but there are a few that we can't. We'll need a waiver or we'll have a question on. We'd like to at least get some information.
let's make it a short, these are the ones, these three,
That's the
we
goal.
can't comply with.
Yeah,
And
we
then
will be-
let us know, because
Yeah.
I know there is a group of neighbors here that probably want to talk about this under public comment and about some of the history of this. So I think that is as important as this presentation.
Right, so
Thanks, Jeff.
I'm not going to weigh the importance of either presentation, but we understand the merit of both, and I think Jeremy's here and can walk through this letter to the extent there are issues we can't comply with. We'll address those right now and assume then, if it's not addressed, it's a will comply.
Perfect. Thanks.
Great. I will note, however, we would like some feedback from that end on issues we can't comply with, or we need guidance on, or it really is a waste of time, and I don't think that's in anybody's best interest. So we'll see how we go.
What I heard is the Planning Commission doesn't intend to discuss these issues that you want guidance on, that there's a big issue here, and that's whether or not you can do anything with Lot 9. So,
So I heard something a little different. Let's see how it goes.
okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Mazars with Chester Valley Engineers. The plan I have before me is the overall subdivision plan. I also have several other plans if the board so chooses to see individual plans. I can also provide them. There's this plan which shows the grading and utilities and more of the lot layout with respect to the site. So with respect to Mr. Phillips' review letter, we won't touch on the will complies, but as we said, let's focus on the items that we believe we need some direction on. There's a mention of potential variance, which we will deal with the zoning hearing board relative to that, so we don't have to discuss that this evening.
Could you reference them by number, please, just so I can make notes?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
That would be comment number 11 on page 3 in Roger's letter.
We can infer from that that you're going to do a will comply on 1 through 10? I think that's the way Mr. Falcone
That's
just
correct.
set that up. I want to be clear about
Will
that.
comply until he gets to, yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Right, we don't know on this one here, because we don't know.
Okay. All right, so relative to comment number 11, the comment states that a variance is required for this condition or the limit of disturbance revised. We would actually ask for your input on that if you would be willing to give us your comment, because we're not exactly sure what the variance is required for. It cites steep slope disturbance, but it doesn't reference the specifics of the disturbance, whether it's the amount, the slopes, or anything to that effect. So we would like some direction if possible, sir.
I'd probably address that to the engineer.
Roger?
I mean, we can do this. I mean, if you know off the top of your head, other than that, I mean, do you need?
Well, they're disturbing steep slopes, and the zoning code is clear that you can't disturb steep slopes only for a certain number of specific uses and conditions, and I don't believe that they meet that.
It's probably something you should meet with them on, I would think.
Hang on. So I guess my only comment about that is that a comment like that, there's no comment I'm going to make tonight that you should take in any way, shape, or form to and infer from it that I think that this is a viable plan. It just, the blanket statement for me is that, so if you're asking for input, that would, that you might infer from that that it's a plan that is viable. And I wouldn't want you to construe that from me. We won't be making that decision.
Understood, ma'am.
Okay.
Just any direction, whether it be the board or Roger Phillips at this point. So, okay. So that's, we appreciate the insight on comment number 11. Let's see. The comment number under Roman numeral 2, subdivision and land development. Comments number 5 and 6 relative to sidewalks and pedestrian paths and streetlights. We believe we may be able to comply with that. However, waivers may need to be requested depending on the interpretation of the ordinance, especially along 800 Goshen Road, along the Goshen Road side, because of that being a PennDOT road. So we will also discuss that with Mr. Phillips. On page 4 of that letter, comment number 17 Section 25540C2 of the ordinance is a section from the multifamily and attached dwelling requirements. We don't feel that that section applies. So we would like someone's interpretation of that. And once again, if we have to set up a meeting with Mr. Phillips, we'll be glad to do that. Roger, do you have any comment on that at this point?
I would just meet offline with him. I mean, we don't need to have an engineer discussion tonight on that issue. You're going to meet with him anyway, so it's not like you're saving a trip.
Can I make a
Understood.
comment on that, though, Steve? I don't see how you could build these houses without proper access for fire equipment. There was a letter from the fire officer on this, and because of the slopes and everything else, they didn't feel that, they could properly fight a fire back there. And I think that alone, it is a major problem. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be building these houses. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, in response to that comment, ma'am, the slopes on our driveway, it's a driveway, common driveway, range from 2 to 4%, so that's extremely flat. So I wanted to make a point that.
I'm just reiterating what the letter said from our
Understood.
township. Thank you.
Excuse me, real quick, that common driveway, I thought that was that historic carriage trail? That's the only part of the site that's really flat, next to a stone wall?
I'm talking about our proposed common driveway. This section is approximately 7 to 7.5%, which is not excessively steep.
But the white stripe is the carriage trail?
That is correct, sir.
Can you use the
So
pointer
you're
on the
partially going to
laptop?
use the carriage trail to have access?
Which one would that be, sir? Okay. This would be the existing carriage trail, the white portion that goes into the plan. This is our proposed common drive. That was what my comment was with respect to.
But that means part of the carriage trail gets turned into driveway?
That is correct, sir.
And I happened to look at the 2005 YouTube, and I think back then, the plan was to preserve the carriage trail entirely. Maybe not, because it wasn't really a discussion of the plan, but the statement was made that the intent was to preserve the carriage trail. Most of it, I guess.
All right, that's just some feedback, so please continue.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that's essentially it for the items in Mr. Phillips' letter. There is an additional letter from Gilmore, from Amy Kaminsky, which I'd like to ask a few questions about that, if I may. Starting with page 2. Comment number 9 and 10, they refer to section 25529 of the ordinance, which deals with off-street parking facilities, such as parking lots. We don't necessarily agree with that relative to the requirements that are brought in the letter. So I guess we can agree to meet with the township engineer on that as well. So we don't have to take your time this evening, but I wanted to make a point to bring that to your attention.
Excuse me again for a moment. You went right to 9 and 10, but you didn't address 5, which seems to be kind of a big thing, of doing a cul-de-sac instead of a driveway.
Oh, thank you, sir. They do recommend a cul-de-sac street. Once again, we have a common drive. Therefore, we don't feel that a cul-de-sac is required for these 3 lots. And if I may bring up a This plan shows lots 5, 6, and 7 from the original subdivision. It's an as-built plan which shows the constructed condition. These 3 lots have a 16-foot wide common driveway with no cul-de-sac. So we're essentially providing the same, very similar application with what we're proposing today. So that's why we don't feel that a cul-de-sac is necessary.
Are those 3 circular driveways in front of each of those, and maybe even a 4th one to, is that what those circles are, to provide, right?
These are turnarounds for each of the houses.
Right, so
I believe that the
turnarounds, kind of like what a cul-de-sac achieves, right, Mrs. Kaminsky? Got it.
That would be correct.
but it's not to the width that a cul-de-sac turnaround, per the ordinance of 40-foot wide, is required.
However,
And this one, if I may comment, the one in the center that I'm pointing to on the screen now, that was an additional one that was added, I believe, with the demolition of the manor house during construction.
I was just going to say that I wasn't the township traffic engineer back when this was first approved, and this is just one of the things that I would recommend. And in fact, you do have some turnaround areas with those circles right there.
Understood. No, and that's why we'd like your opinion and any feedback we may get this evening. Thank you for bringing that number to my attention too, sir.
One more comment.
Yes.
I know you were initially before Shade Tree, because I'm now liaison to them as well, and we requested on Shade Tree a new plan that would give us more definition on the trees that were coming down, the species, et cetera. And there was no quorum last week, so this really hasn't been through Shade Tree so far. And I'm surprised that you're still using the June plan as opposed to a revised plan that we had requested for Shade Tree. Because I got in the Shade Tree packet, there was no new plan. So I'm bringing that to your attention collaterally with everything else.
Understood, but we just received the review letters for the initial submission. So we would like to get feedback from the township engineer and staff prior to revising the plan before we came to see you, because if there were subsequent revisions, we would like your input on that.
We didn't ask for a complete plan revision on Shade Tree. We asked for actually blowing up one of the pages here to show like two halves of the trees that were going to come down. And maybe it wasn't clear at the time, but that's what we really want. In other words, this has got 100 or 150 trees coming down. We don't even know what's coming down. And it's very hard to read that plan, which is why we asked for a bigger set, basically like the Ardrossan set, in the sense that this corner is one whole page, this corner is another page, at least 2 pages instead of the one. Just passing that through, because I guess you'll be in front of Shade Tree in August, I hope. But we need a quorum.
That would be helpful, yes, sir.
I do have one question. I didn't realize when you skipped over it that we could ask this, but back on the Gannett letter, in not commenting on number 12, what I infer from that is that you will revise this plan because you can't assume that you would receive a waiver.
Which Gannett letter? There's 2 Gannett letters.
I'm sorry, the first letter that you went over.
Mr. Phillips' letter?
Mr. Phillips' letter, page 4, comment number 12. When you say you will comply, how I hear you saying that is that you will revise lots 2 and 3 so that you don't exceed the width.
That's not correct. I said there was waivers that we may be considering, but we'd had to get input from the township engineer.
Got it, so that's under that waiver list.
Yeah, that could be one of them. That's correct, and thank you for pointing that out.
I thought the whole intention was to find out what the waivers and variances.
It was. That's what I thought.
So I don't really know where this is going.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion, since you're not prepared to address the waivers, like that one in particular, there's another one in here that, number 21, there's a saldo provision referenced in Roger's letter. Land set aside as open space on the subdivision plan is not subject to development. So are you asking that that be waived, or are you asking that that be interpreted to not apply? So somebody needs to.
I thought I made that clear, Mr. Rice. We believe that does.
Okay, well,
There's
that's,
a lot going on, right? So,
we'd like to know that.
so we think, so that's the primary issue, John, right? I mean, that's kind of the lead-in to Roger's letter. That's why John was speaking. That's kind of the elephant in the room here. Is the lot developable? And it's going to be decided not by this board, probably not by the commissioners. It's probably going to end up in court. We know that as well. However, we've got a laundry list of things here, and we went through it as we would for any other application because Roger took the time to put a letter together for us with comments that are helpful and guiding in what we're trying to do here. Because in the end, we believe the lot's developable, and that's our position. So we want to continue this process moving along so that once that determination is made, and if it comes in the way we believe it will, we want to have this plan ready to take action on it. We've also heard, we don't want to hear discussion between engineers. There should be things that should be handed out later. So there's kind of conflicting direction here. If we want to go through the items each that we're going to need a waiver and have the discussion, we are here to do that. That's why we're here, because we are looking for guidance, because we don't think in every instance the ordinance was interpreted correctly. But we'd like to have that discussion. We'd like to have it with you. We'd like to have it with Roger and with John. But maybe this isn't the right forum for that, but we want you to know we took the time to review Roger's letter because he again, put together a very detailed letter that guided us in this plan. So we don't think we're wasting time because ultimately we think these issues are going to be very relevant and important for this discussion. But we also think there's a bigger issue here. But we can't set this thing aside until it's appropriately set aside by whatever body's going to do that. And Mr. Rice issued a letter, I guess a week and a half ago, saying the township intended to take this to court. And if that's where it ends up, then I guess we'll all move there. But until that happens, we're proceeding with the understanding that we've got a formal plan in, and we're here for a formal review, and we want to have that. We want to have that time with you because we.
So then, I don't really feel like your engineer is properly prepared, doesn't understand the engineering questions, and I don't want those discussed here. If you want to discuss the variance question, Mr. Rice does want to discuss those, I'd be happy to discuss them with you.
Or the waivers, you're saying?
The waivers.
Okay.
Okay?
Then
So
that
let's
would be
limit
fine.
it to the waivers, not interpretation of what this is. What do you mean by that?
And why not send a letter to the township saying, these are the waivers we want. Let's put it in writing. These are the waivers, or these are the sections that we disagree on, we want to discuss. That's a lot more efficient way to do this than to do what we're doing tonight, putting aside the open space lot. If you think this is a legitimate plan, I mean, that's a pretty common practice to have your engineer write a waiver letter. That way we all have a written record of it. We know what you're asking to be waived. We know whether it's a partial waiver, a full waiver, whatever kind of waiver you want to request, we know what it is, and it's in writing. So, I mean, that would be my suggestion. I don't think it's productive, given the background of this and the issue with the open space lot. So can that be done, Mr. Falcone?
Sure. If that's the preferred method, we can absolutely do that.
I think that makes a lot more sense on this plan.
Is that okay?
So we'll make a motion. I'm looking for a motion that we ask the applicant to send a list of the waivers that they're requesting in writing, and for now, we'll table it.
I mean, I don't
we need to
think
make a
you
motion
need,
for
I don't
that.
think you need a motion. I think
Right.
Mr. Falcone said he would do it.
So we'll just table
If
it.
you want to do a motion to table it, you do. I know have some residents that probably want to comment about this plan.
Well, yeah, that's real. Thank you, John. Yeah.
We'll do it.
Okay, fine. Well, no, the public's going to comment right now, yeah. I got a little ahead of myself, so I apologize. Is anyone from the public would like to speak?
I have trouble hearing you. You said to ask for public comments?
Yes, please, sorry.
My name is Peter Klaus. I live at 758 Darby Paoli Road. I believe I am probably
one of the most directly and adversely affected by this application. My history of the events is quite different than the history that Mr. Snyder gave you a few minutes ago regarding this open space issue. Let me go back to the beginning. 50 years ago, I bought my property and built my house, and my primary motivations in choosing that place to live and build, and I'm still here 50 years later, is partly the triple arch stone bridge that the Pugh family built in 1901, which my neighbor over here and I share as a driveway access, partly the fact that I've always liked water around where I live, and I like the fact of having the Darby Creek going through the property. I like the woods, I like the privacy. On 3 sides when I built, the north, south, and eastern sides, I could not see another house. Even after I built, I can only see one house on the western side most of the year when the trees are blooming. My broker at the time when I bought the property gave me some assurances which proved to be very correct as time went on. She pointed out that Ardrossan and its various properties were restrained by trust restrictions until at least the year 2000 before there would be any development, and that basically was true. She also advised me that Mr. Norris, who owned the 22-acre site that became Montparnasse and now has Lot 9, was not interested in selling any of that land. And in fact, I tried to buy some using the broker as an intermediary. Didn't want to sell. Everything was fine until shortly before 1998, Mr. Norris and his adult son both died. I think the son predeceased the father. And the father left the land to the University of Pennsylvania, where there was some family connection, I think having to do with the libraries at Penn. Penn sold it to Mr. Holloway, who then created Goshen Holding. And in 1998, before work had started on Montparnasse above me, Mr. Holloway came to my house unannounced. He initiated it, knocked on the door, explained what he was going to do, and asked that I not oppose his subdivision of the first 8 lots. He said originally it might be 7, it might be 8, depending upon whether the Norris Mansion could remain standing. I expressed my concerns. The slope behind my house on the southern side is very, very steep, and I was worried about mud and water runoff and the fact that there would be houses where there hadn't been houses before, the fact that the old lumber trail or whatever it is was up there and so on. And he then offered to me that if I would not oppose him, he was going to give that land that is now Lot 9 to, quote, a nature conservancy, end of quote. Then we have the plans that were filed that designated it as open space. And then, at a hearing before this board on March 19, 1998, in testimony, I assume by Mr. Snyder, because I was not at that hearing, asked Mr. Holloway what they were proposing to do with the 9th lot, which is roughly a 9-acre parcel. Quote, what we're proposing as open space which runs alongside the Darby Creek and protects the majority of the steep slopes that are on the site. It also includes the original carriage drive trail, which is a non-macadam drive that has a stone wall and has been determined to have historical significance. And here's the key quote, and that is to be totally preserved. The next page of the transcript, he's asked, how it's going to be restricted. He was talking about the homeowners in the, that would be in the 8 houses or the 7 houses, whichever it was, he was going to build. And he was asked by you, actually, restricted through just to those homeowners, question mark. His answer, yes, it will be. As a matter of fact, we are planning to discuss the possibility of a conservation easement with National Land Trust or Brandywine Conservancy. So I have a very different view of what his promise in return for my promise. I kept my part of the bargain. I did not oppose him when he subdivided the upper part of the property into the 8 lots and built the houses. But now I note he wants to subdivide Lot 9 into 3 lots that only comprise roughly 4 acres. I'm rounding off, 4 acres of Lot 9. What's going to happen in a couple of years? Does he come back and say, I now want to subdivide the other 5 acres? I don't know. But I'm worried about that. What I'm particularly worried about is the impact on the creek and the properties immediately upstream, which are mine and my neighbor over here, Mr. Piver, and others who may be in the back because I haven't looked around yet. If any of you were up early yesterday morning and saw the heavy rainfall, I went out as soon as it was daylight, went on the bridge, went on my deck, walked down in the yard, and the flooding was intense. And that was not a major storm. That was just a large downpour. Water was rushing through Lot 9, including where he has his orange storm fences. So I'm really concerned that, well, let me ask a question. How often is a floodplain defined? When's the last time that somebody said this floodplain goes from here to there? I'd submit it may be a lot wider now, because I've seen these floods over 50 years, and they're extreme. I'm up high enough that I've never been bothered. I believe that the exchange of those mutual promises was a contract, and I intend to enforce it. Hate to have to do that, but that's what I'm going to do. Because I particularly like where I live, I like the immediate environment, and I hate to see it change. These houses, may I borrow one of your map that you had before this one? I just want to point to something. It was the one that shows where the 3 are going to go now. Yeah. Here's my property line here, right along here. The thing that's deceptive in this plan, well, maybe it
Can you turn the microphone, please? Could you move the mic over to you?
Sorry. These things echo so much, I never trust them. If I'm standing on my property right here, for instance, the slope goes directly toward me. The slope does not go that way, it goes this way. So my property is going to get the brunt of whatever comes down the hill. And I'm very worried if a lot of trees are cut down, then the soil and the ground cover is going to wash away. Now, I don't know how many trees they're proposing to cut. These are very large old forest trees. Oaks, tulip poplars, maples, ash. If they're all cut down, and I think in his proposal 4 years ago where he was going to build a single house, there were some 69 or 70 trees that were going to be cut down. And that's a concern. I have a lot of other concerns, but they parallel a lot of the points raised by the Delaware Planning Commission, so I won't bore you with repeating them. I also sent a letter to Mr. Kochanski on June 26, when originally this was to be heard at a hearing on July 5, and I was leaving for Europe the next day on the 27th of June. And I hope you all got that letter.
Did.
So I won't repeat all those points, but basically that's my position.
Klaus, could I
Thank you.
just ask you one thing?
Sure.
what you were quoting there, they were notes of testimony from a zoning board hearing, correct?
I'm not
Not a
sure
planning.
because I don't have the entire transcript.
Well, we normally don't have transcripts for planning commission.
It
So,
says, you're correct.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, because
Yep.
Peter Breitling was the chairman then.
yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Any additional public comment? Thank you.
Everybody, hello. My name is David Piver, and I'm Peter Klaus's neighbor. I live at 756 Darby Paley Road, which would be approximately... the one thing I just wanted to take your time to impress upon is the degree of flooding in this area. My house has been flooded, actually flooded. I had about half a foot of water in my house from a big storm, which I know has to do with the development of this area and the deforestation and the continuous building of houses all through the watershed. That if the trees are taken out of this area, that will only exacerbate that problem and will probably result in additional water down in this area, in that area of the creek, which will then add additional obstacles, which will then back the water up further and probably highly likely result in flooding of my house. My house has almost been flooded about a half a dozen times. Only one time did the water actually breach the house. So that's all I have to say. Has everybody here ever been to that property? Just curious. Anybody been to that property? It's a very unique property in our county. The slopes are, the pictures don't give a full picture of exactly how steep the slopes are and what a unique area it is. I think that I also want that in the record, that the area is a uniquely beautiful area to the degree that that has any bearing on the decision of this body, if this body is the one that makes the decision. So it's worth taking a look at to see exactly what kind of, bring this to 3 dimensions, to really see what kind of an area you're talking about actually putting houses into, and the type of destruction that it would require to do that. And my last comment is that to the degree that this has been designated as open space, that seems to be the issue that is really the pink elephant in the room. So I guess that we won't be deciding that tonight. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Harriet Anderson, and I live at 849 Goshen Road, right up the road from the proposed development. There is an attempt here tonight to characterize Lot 9 as developable, but that it was not developed at the time the other houses were built due to access problems and due to site distance issues. This appears to be contradicted by what is recorded in Delaware County, as acknowledged in the April 12, 2012 correspondence authored by Radnor Township, Director of Community Development. There's a statement tonight that from 1997 to 1998, the intent to develop existed. This appears to be contradicted by what is testimony of Mr. Holloway that was referenced here tonight. The testimony was in a public hearing before the Zoning Hearing Board, and that occurred on March 19, 1998. Notwithstanding the threshold issue of the intent and the restriction on the lot, there would be such a negative impact on stormwater all over Goshen Road, as well as on the neighborhood in general, should any development occur. For that reason, I support the June 3, 2016 recommendation of the Delaware County Planning Department to disprove the proposed development. And I know no decisions are going to be made here tonight, but for the record, I would urge us to do the right thing. And I would urge us to disprove any proposed development. It's wrong in our gut, and I think we're all feeling that tonight. It's wrong according to the recording in Delaware County, and it's wrong according to the testimony of Mr. Holloway himself. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening, Judy Sherry, 725 Governor's Circle. I live kind of over the other side of this development. Listening to the conversation at the beginning of the meeting, I'm not sure what your role will be, but I'm still going to give you my thoughts in case your role should become available at some other time. I strongly urge the Planning Commission to recommend denying the application to subdivide Lot 9 into 3 residential lots for the following reasons. 1, prior promises, engineer drawings, recorded land development plans, and sworn testimony at the March 1998 Zoning Board by the developer himself, Cass Holloway, that this lot would be dedicated for open space. This fact was a critical consideration for the approval of the other 8 building lots, which are all located on steep slopes. Number 2, steep slopes. Number 3, stormwater. Number 4, the close proximity to Darby Creek. Number 5, safety, the ability to respond to emergencies and the danger of accessing Goshen Road right next to the bridge. Since the approval of Montparnasse almost 20 years ago, Mr. Holloway has repeatedly tried to have Lot 9 converted to a building lot. It was suggested that this meant he wanted to establish the land valuation for tax purposes, not because he ever intended to build on the land. That suggestion, that understanding was wrong. I've spoken publicly about this a number of times. For example, in January 2005, when I was running for election, I stated publicly my opposition to the development of this parcel because of environmental issues like those just stated. Again, in 2012, I asked that the Zoning Board refuse to grant Mr. Holloway any additional relief on Lot 9 and uphold Radnor Township's zoning officer's grading permit application denial dated April 5th, 2012. Planning Commission members, when you walk this site, which I hope you all will do, the issues are crystal clear. Montparnasse homes are perched way up above you on the left, and Darby Creek is way below you on the right. Please uphold the recommendations of the Township staff and the Delaware County Planning Department, among others, and deny this request. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, good evening. I'm Dan Cherry, and last I checked, I also live at 725 Governor's Circle. And I'm not going to pile on, but I'm just going to bring up one point. I think the points that have been raised have been excellent ones with all the issues. But I would ask you, and through your solicitor, to look at the 2005 and the 1998 agreements and the testimony, and look at the history of what went into that. Back at that time, the declaration agreement between the homeowners and the developer required the township to approve any changes to the declaration agreement. And that's what happened in 2005. It was not the township approving this property as a building site. The township basically was saying, we are approving this arrangement between the homeowners association and the developer. And if you look at the resolution, the township in the final couple paragraphs said, please don't come back to us again. This is a private matter. Deal with it among yourselves. And that's what happened in 2005. So any argument that the resolution in 2005 is somehow binding upon you or binding upon any entity in Radnor Township that this is a building site, I would submit that it is not. It is with no merit. You've heard all the other arguments about the issues. I know that if you haven't walked the site, if you do, they will jump out at you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Just a little word of advice, don't touch the microphone.
My name's Gretchen Grobel. I'm here on behalf of the Radnor Conservancy and our board of directors. I'm their executive director. I've been with the Conservancy just less than 2 years, so I'm fairly new to the Lot 9 issue. But in my research and talking with some of the neighbors, it's always been understood since the late 90s that Lot 9 was always represented as open space to the neighbors and the township officials. I've recently been out on the property, and the steep slopes extend sharply down into the Darby Creek's floodplain boundaries. And I was curious if there's been any kind of studies on how much of that is wetlands, how much of that the land is wetlands encroaching up the slope. And we're very concerned about the 60 plus. You had mentioned 150 trees, something that I had seen on the recent plans that were just submitted said 60 plus heritage trees were proposed to be taken out. And obviously that impacts major stormwater runoff. And also no one's mentioned the destruction of a major habitat for wildlife. So the Conservancy and many of our constituents really hope that you'll seriously consider the long-term environmental impacts if this acreage is developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional? Okay.
I have 2 visual aids. I'm Abby Rosenthal. I'm a neighbor of Peter Klaus and David Piver. And so I just have a visual that I want to show you. So this is
Actually, Abby, could you please lay it down there, pretty much in the center? Lay it down.
Where?
On the table.
Oh, this.
No, right. Thank you.
Oh.
That table.
I'm not sure you can see it.
Well,
He can zoom in.
You can zoom
See
in.
the orange fence that was put in place. Peter can see the orange fence. It's
Yes.
approximately where they're going to build. And see, do you see it's in the Darby Creek? So where they were going to build must be floodplain, because otherwise, I just thought you'd like to see that. And here, I got this from Delaware County. So it clearly says open space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? We have one staff question.
This is something I'd like you to work on. When a number of us came on planning, one of the early meetings dealt with new floodplain maps, and I'm hoping that the applicant has used the latest floodplain maps and areas, and if you could verify it.
If there's no additional board comment, then I'm going to make a motion that we table this.
Motion to table.
How about a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye, all opposed? Nay, motion carries. Thank you. No. All right, next on the agenda is the PL ordinance amendment. And we have some review letters on this. Yeah, here he is. Commissioner Curley's here as well. Right. I don't want, that was terrible. Yep. Regina, any comments on the PLO? And we'll start with you. Yeah, or Sue. Now we'll go with Sue. Sue will warm us up. Any comments?
I do. I have two comments that are kind of my overarching comments. One is that, with all due respect, I believe that Mr. Falcone gave us a comment letter, and I do think that with regarding to accessory structures, specifically the parking structure, and I do not agree with, I'm concerned that his recommendation of language still does not address the concern about putting up a parking garage as a means to increase density. However, putting that to the side, a big concept that we discussed last month in Mr. Curley's proposed ordinance is the notion of just restricting the size of the buildings based on the acreage. And I would still like us to look at the inference that the smaller the building, the less traffic is certainly, a logical pathway to believe, except that adding in traffic neutrality on top of that gives us the assurance. And I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think that we can say that a property can't build more than X number of square feet per acre, and they have to show traffic neutrality. And in that context, I am less, and I don't say completely, but I'm less concerned about whether it's items on the A column or the B column, because at the end of the day, if they still have to demonstrate traffic neutrality, then it's up to the property owners to figure out what market forces are going to work for them. And whether we say it's 70% or it's 40%, we may end up constraining property owners in a way that's difficult for them to meet their objectives and of making money, which they want to do. And as long as they still have to demonstrate traffic neutrality, perhaps it's less about what the actual percentages are and more about letting each individual property owner figure out what's going to work on their individual property. But the two have to go hand in hand for me. I think we all can know intuitively that, office space has more traffic than the hotel. ITE shows it. Amy gave us a lot of really good information about that. But I still think that we should be keeping in the components about traffic neutrality. And I don't see that it's a problem to keep in traffic neutrality. I'm going back and forth over this notion of the size of the minimum acreage. 3 of the 7 lots aren't 10 acres. I'm not exactly sure what the magic of the 10 acres was initially, except that given the application that we just tabled, I do want to avoid a situation where we have a subdivision of a property down further, and then we have, each individual property owner, gets to generate their own traffic. And so I just want to make sure we understand clearly, if we're going to make a change to the lot size, that we understand the unintended consequences of it. The general comment that's on the back of the page from the applicant about the corporate identification signage, as long as things aren't lit electronically and as long as there's not off-premises signs, which are the back door to billboards, I think the current signage has worked really well in the PLO. Low, except for that one number on the one tall building, but not backlit. They don't need to be. We seem to have plenty of, I think every applicant has said they have plenty of occupancy, so I don't think that signs are the signs in Google Maps. I don't think that signs are the be-all and end-all, and I think Google Maps has largely made the need for big signs to direct people to where they're going kind of obsolete. The nitty-gritty of this, I think, is going to, largely depend on where we decide to go with the pared-down ordinance. So I'll restrict my other comments from that.
Actually, I'd just like to jump in there. With the signage, the language here saying that it was proposed by the Planning Commission, I don't believe that we were the ones who proposed it. And I also would prefer not to have it myself. I never really was in favor of that. And I want to echo what Susan said with the traffic neutrality. However, we were getting to a point where we're looking at like a 5 to 10% reduction. I think that would be, even if it's a 5% reduction, would be a beneficial thing for the commuters who go through there at the peaks and things like that. If you're looking at, I think where we got a little bogged down with the traffic neutrality was the whole looking at trips per day and peak and things like that. If we're willing to allow more trips throughout the day in exchange for a reduction in the peak, that makes sense. But to keep the peak where it is and allow for additional trips throughout the day by allowing uses that aren't currently allowed, that's where I think we were getting into a problem. So that's the trick there, is that if we're going to have additional trips throughout the day, then the peak has to be reduced in somehow, like some kind of a scale that, you tip the scale one way or the other. If you're going to increase throughout the day, then you're going to reduce the peaks. Something, it has to be a give and take. And I think that I do feel a lot better if we have some kind of traffic neutrality, traffic reduction, or traffic balancing. Balancing is what I would rather look at as part of the package. I support the 10-acre minimum.
If I could just jump in and make a comment on that. I would also agree with traffic neutrality. My main problem with it is it's an unknown entity. And it's not like you will do A, B, and C. It's kind of, well, you sort of have to do this with that. And it's amorphous. The other thing is maybe the plans and the buildings are based on traffic neutrality. And we may have that with the possible initial occupants going in. But 10 years from now, who's to say that the same owners will have the property? Nobody will remember traffic neutrality. It's the same thing like the Goshen Road thing. Some people remember it, but there's a change in staff and things like that, and you forget what happened 10 or 20 years ago on these things. So I kind of like to see specifics where you're allowed to do A, B, and C, but not D on there. The other thing, I think being realistic, that site right now is unoccupied, and we have peak traffic that is bad. I think it's unrealistic to think that that will not get a little worse because that's going to be developed. So if it stays the same, I think we're lucky, considering that there will be a lot more occupancy in there. And if it's spread out over the day rather than having it increase during peak, we're probably ahead of the game, and I hate to say that, but I think it's being realistic as to what we can expect with the roads the way they are at the moment in time. One other thing that bugs me is we have looked at this ordinance for months now. I think we've continually said we don't want a health and fitness center in there. It is not part of another business like a hotel, and it keeps showing up. Why? Didn't we, that was one of the things we as a group took a vote on and decided we did not want an indoor health and fitness center. So why does it keep showing up? If you want our opinion, do something with it. I'm sorry, but it's getting a little frustrating.
Kathy, if I could add to that, and I don't want to speak on specific parameters within any of the ordinances, but I think what we had discussed last month was instead of making revisions to any one draft, that the Planning Commission will put together a memo in memo format of their recommendations. So when you see it in subsequent drafts, it's not that we're not listening to you, just that the board wants to see, the Board of Commissioners would like to see a line-by-line item instead of making constant revisions.
We did that months ago.
We keep putting amendments into an ordinance versus getting a list of issues that the Planning Commission would want to see.
However, if we say we do not want this, and we take a vote on that one item, there were some other ones we did too, but yet it's never taken out.
No, because it's your recommendation. The board will then consider your recommendation on a point-by-point basis. So one of the points in your memo will be remove indoor recreation. The Board of Commissioners will then decide, do they want to remove that or keep it in? But this body is making a recommendation on a draft to the Board of Commissioners for further action.
But Kevin, I think how we got to here today, we took an ordinance or an overlay and worked on it 7 or 8 times. We finally said, this is what we more or less can live with. We sent it over, and we now have a new ordinance to look at to compare and contrast with the one we worked on for 8 times.
Correct. And my
Which
assumption
means-
would be that the Board of Commissioners are more in line with what they are now sending back down to you than what you sent up to them.
I have a
That wasn't the impression I got at
At the end of last
meeting
meeting,
they held.
At the end of last meeting, we were charged with, look at what you've been working on for 8 times, and look at what you just got from Commissioner Curley, and tell us how you would be different from maybe Commissioner Curley. And I think partially we're doing that. And partially we're ratifying some of the items in his ordinance. But-
Staff's recommendation was still to provide a memo of a point-by-point basis of your recommendations, taking what you've worked on with Steve Gabriel and then incorporating it into a list of specific recommendations so that the board can go down point by point and say, yes, we agree with the recommendation, or no, this is how we want to have it.
Well-
Any changes would then come back to you in ordinance format.
I guess we don't have a recording secretary or our own personal staff, so what we came to this meeting with, at least I did, was I have about 6 or 7 things that I wanted to bring up, and someone's recording this, and you can create the memo based on what we're saying, is what we're saying.
Correct.
Skip will give it to him. All right, I got health clubs down here. Said I have health clubs down here. So, I mean, we'll just give you bullet points. Right? I mean,
Yeah, come to an
that's preferred.
agreement on what your recommendation is for any of the provisions that were proposed by Commissioner Curley's draft, and then anything from the other work that you've done that you would like to see in, whether it's what Steve Gabriel worked on, or the previous iterations of the PLO amendments.
So can I just make a point of clarification, though? And that was how I understood it, Mr. Kachansky, which is the reason I said what I said at the beginning about I understand that at this stage of the game, kind of regardless of what's happened, what we're working off of is the ordinance we got last month that was proposed by Mr. Curley. And it's our job to add into it or delete from it those things that we feel are important, and largely that's going to be from the work we did with Mr. Gabriel. But one thing I do want to make, I just want to clarify, is that, so for instance, in the memo, in the ordinance that we got from Mr. Curley, there's no mention of signs, even though that had been an integral part of a lot of the other ordinances. And what I do want to just want to make sure is that if we, as the 9 of us, don't specifically say in a bullet point, we don't want the signage information, it's not going to show up in the ordinance, right? Because we're working off of what Mr. Curley wrote.
Correct.
And my inference from Mr. Curley's work is that he believes the sign language belongs in the portion of the zoning that handles signage. And I mean, that's because he didn't put it into this. And that his intention was to simplify it down, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So then should we just go line item here?
You mean start from the beginning and work our way through?
Start from the beginning, and let's just, pick at them one at a time.
Before we go through the list, I just wanted to, something that Kathy was saying, it's kind of conveying a mixed message, because Kathy, what you were saying, how if we have traffic neutrality, we'll be very lucky, because right now there's nothing there. Traffic neutrality would not be, in the definitions, equal to what's there today. It would be equal to what's available in this current code on these properties combined. So that's a little misleading, because if there was any way for us to actually say, we're going to maintain the existing peak volume, we'd all win, but that's not even close to what's going to happen. So this is very tricky stuff, and we have to be very careful with unintended increases in potential traffic if we don't pin it down here. And there's trip generations, there's all kinds of different things that are available to us to take a plan, look at the current traffic that's allowed under our existing ordinance, and compare it with what's the proposed development, and to cap it at that at the peaks, or to reduce it at the peaks, or whatever it is that we choose to do. And I don't think even though it might be complicated, it's a worthwhile endeavor to protect the township, because that's the main issue here.
I don't disagree with you. No.
Okay, can we go to Article 2? Section A, List A?
So the wording has not, I believe that the wording that we have in front of us, which is difficult to see, but I brought last month's copy, which had red, the wording of the use regulations, 51% to 100%, and then the 0 to 49%. I thought we identified last month that the wording there was not the intention. And I would like to be clear about that, because the way I read that is that you can only have up to 49% of List B. And I don't know why we would want to restrict a property to 49% of some of the lower traffic uses. That the wording here makes no sense.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And we talked about this last month, and the wording is not changed, so.
The ordinance has not changed from what was provided to you last month, because we are going to go through a round of getting final comments. It's going to go up to the board. They're going to consider your comments, and then there'll be revisions to the draft. But we don't disagree that the language in A and B need to be revised accordingly. The percentages, however, are something that we're looking for as far as, is it 70%, is it 40%? You know, those are up for discussion. The concern with List B and making List B 100% of the site is then you're taking a PLO district and now converting it to something that's traditionally not PLO. So there was some concern at the board level of allowing uses that are not traditionally in the PLO to be developed at 100% in a PLO district.
But who cares? We're doing a whole new thing with the point of.
Yeah, but we're trying not to take an office area that's zoned and turned into a retail center.
Ultimately, if that
Fair
is.
comment.
And that is correct. That is some of the view of the board, from my understanding. But if your concern and your recommendation is to open that up, then put that as part of your recommendation, and the board will take it under advisement.
Well, okay, so then let me take this back a different way then. Going back to A, reading List A, if you're 100% office,
I don't think we want,
use.
yeah, we don't want that, right. So so it's 51 to 70, 80, whatever the number is.
How about?
Okay, so I guess for the bullet point then, to your point,
We have to give them the number.
on page
70,
2,
80.
under Article 2, use regulations A and B, the bullet point I would say on the memo is the wording for A and B under use regulation need to be revised.
Just change the 100%. What do we want to make it?
What's the PLO allowing for now?
Pardon me?
What does it allow for now?
100% office, 100% of these uses.
But we're also saying it has to be 51% office or scientific research, when scientific research doesn't even exist in the township anymore. That's what A is saying. It has to be 51% office space.
Yeah, I got a suggestion for you.
Because we don't have scientific PL. We don't have
Give them a max
the P and the L.
on the A. Give them a max on the A of 49% or 51%, but let B go as high as they want to. So if they want B at 75%, that would therefore make the other one, the office, A, 25%.
I think what we're
Just put a
trying.
max on the A.
I think what we're trying to do is create an overlay in an office park, okay, that will encourage mixed use, that will help with traffic neutrality, but that will still maintain the character of an office park. Okay, if we change all the uses to non-office, we don't have the character of
I'm
an
not
office park.
disagreeing with you on that, but
But then if you can't, if you have all the B uses, you can't go up to 70% B uses. You've changed the
it's just an
character.
example. You could put, I think it'd be easier to put a max on the A use, but allow B to go higher, and therefore A would go lower.
That's fine, but
So they specifically instructed us that the A needed to be, you can't max A, because they want you to be able to retain, if you want, 100% of A. But if you go into a mixed use, it has to include a certain portion of A. We got very specific instructions from certain commissioners who did not want to, as they called it, destroy the PLO. So in order to preserve it, we needed a minimum A, not a maximum, or they won't entertain it.
Okay, well, that defeats the purpose of it. That's, if they want a maximum A at 51%.
you don't have the overlay, though. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's 100%, you don't have
Then you
it.
don't get the bonuses. But
Right.
when you want the mixed use, what they said was, great, but you have to retain you must retain some character of your A.
Which is
Now,
51% in this instance.
draft, but they did say at that meeting, which I'm sure you all watched, they would be willing to lower that to some lower number to allow for a higher percentage of B, provided that we always had some amount of A. So maybe A could drop to 25 or 30%, and you could get 70 or 75% of B, which then speaks to your traffic.
I think that's what I just said.
But you said
Could
it's
you-
reversed.
No,
You
I
said
didn't.
You needed A.
Could you reverse those numbers, make A, B, and BA? In other words, make A the 0 to 49%, and then B would be, 51% to 100.
That's what I just said.
I think what's happening here is we're still thinking in terms of overlays, but this is to replace the existing zoning. So now, if you say you can only have up to 50% business, office, you all of a sudden took away 50% office capability from all the people in the PLO, which they're allowed to do today, and that really...
No, the percentages are going to come in when you want to do a mixed use. If you want to develop by right under current PLO, you can do that anytime you want to. This ordinance...
Isn't
and
this
that's what
replacing the PLO?
This is written as a
Okay, but
replacement.
This is
List
written as a
A-
replacement.
List A contains all of the uses that are currently permitted in the PLO. So that's why you can do up to 100%. If you want to get into the reduced setbacks and the developable area per acre, that's where then you can start adding in List B. As soon as you add in List B, you get up to from 30% up to the 49%. If you get that mix in there, then you get the reduced setbacks, the increased building height, and the cap of the developable gross square footage per acre.
See, I'm not seeing that in this version of this ordinance. I'm not seeing, well, maybe just pointed out to me and I'm not reading it. I'm not seeing that if you want those reduced setbacks, you have to do the mixed use.
Section G on
Okay,
page 3.
G.
280-64G. There's a cross-reference to the Section B uses.
And we understand that if there's going to be some formatting to make this read a little easier,
Okay.
but
Okay, but in G, it doesn't make reference to having to mix uses that I'm reading. Maybe I'm missing it.
sure, the first sentence where it says a building or unified group of buildings may include uses specified in B, then they will be subject to the following, minimum of 30%.
May, doesn't say shall. Must, doesn't say
Okay.
must, it says it may. So how I read that is you may do that, but if you want the increased height and the lowered setbacks, you don't have to do that. That's the difference. That's what I'm seeing in G that is of concern to me. Under the version that we had, that we've been working on, in order to get the increased setback and in order to get the lowered setbacks and the increased height, you had to, you must, you shall, whatever, do mixed uses. That word may is very specifically giving the option.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you. I think if you decide to choose B and you decide to go with mixed uses, then you are subject to all of the parameters. But you're not subject to those parameters if you don't do the mixed uses in B.
I guess
And we can discuss the finer points of that, but we understand.
Setbacks
what your
aren't a
concern is.
may, they're a must. It's just if you want to do the mixed use, that's a may. You may do a mixed use.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you is the way I read the ordinance. You can have the increased height
Yes, we
And you-
understand, and if
okay.
your recommendation is to clarify that you're only going to get the mixed uses, I'm sorry, if you're only going to get the increase in building height and the reduced setbacks, then you have to do the mix of uses, we will have the ordinance corrected. But the intent is that you get reduced setbacks, increased building height, only when you do the mix of uses.
So I understand the intention, and we
Okay,
just,
then your recommendation is to make it clear, then that will be what your
I
wording is.
think the question I'm asking, so I think we're saying the same thing, is that the Board of Commissioners continued on that premise as well, right? That the mixed use, that in order to get increased height and lowered setbacks, they still intended it had to be under the.
Correct.
Mixed. Thank you.
But how do you define mixed use? That we still need to define what mixed use
Correct,
is.
we're going back to.
Which is what we're doing in the 51 and 49%.
51 to 100 on list A, and then 30 to 49% on
Okay,
list B.
so they can do all that, but we're going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to say if you want mixed use, then you can have no more than 70% of A, and the rest has to be B, whatever we decide, correct? So we need to define what percent allows us to fall into mixed use. What percent, what's the limit, the upper limit of A, what's the A-B mix that allows you to fall in? So you can't have any more than 70% A, the rest has to be B, and if you do that, if it's 70% or less of A and the rest B, then you can fall into the mixed use
But I think
definition.
you want to take it from an approach of no less than a percentage in
You know,
A.
less than percentage of A, so whatever the number is, but I'm just,
Let me give a wording suggestion. We're going to fix the word may later down in the ordinance.
Yeah.
If we keep A as up to 100% of the gross floor area may be used, and it's still the things that exist in PLO. And then list B is 0 to 70%, and I'm not saying 70 is the number, but the inference there is that up to 70% can be the list B, which means that it has to maintain 30% office space, or something. And I don't know that 70 and 30 is the...
No, that's the wrong way to
The
do it.
way this is describing, it, the way I'm seeing it, is we're allowing 30 to 50% to be from list B. We're not allowing less than 30% as mixed use. Is that how it is? We can't, either you go between 30 and 50? Is that pretty
Yes.
much the intention? Is that what we
Yes,
want?
and while it was 49%, so that the majority of the site stayed as the character
Well,
of
49,
the
yeah,
PLO. Yes.
yeah.
So that's why that 49-51 is so that the majority of the site in a mixed-use scenario would be the character of the existing PLO.
Now, what if someone wanted to do less than 30 and not get any of the benefits of the setbacks or the building height, or, could they have 10% of list B if they wanted it, but they weren't asking for anything in return? I mean, could we have a category, you can go mixed less than 30, but you don't get any real benefit other than the variety of services?
That's the way I read this.
Because that's kind of how it's...
We did discuss that at the board level.
Is that the intention?
And no, that's not the intention. The reason why there's a minimum was because we are taking some risk, and we're not going to take a risk for 10%, meaning that if what we want out of this is traffic reduction, we get traffic reduction by increasing the B uses. If we allow 10%, that's not enough traffic reduction for us to justify making the change. So that's why we set the minimum at 30%. Now, if you think the minimum should be 25%, or you think the minimum should be 35%, that's the sort of thing that we want to hear. But there has to be a minimum that serves as a trigger to justify the change.
No, that wasn't the question, though. The question was, if somebody wants to just develop the way it is now and not use the, all the incentives, can they do a 90-10 development?
Okay, no. And the reason is because of that minimum 30%. So what you...
But they wouldn't get any of the benefits.
Yes. So
they can't do it regardless.
That's right.
Even though it would be more beneficial to us, they can't do it.
Yes, that's correct.
What are we giving up? Why wouldn't we do that?
What are we giving up?
No, we're not giving them any of that.
Basically, what they would be doing is using a use that's less traffic impact.
Right, exactly.
But they're not getting anything in return other than the fact that
They get no
enhances
benefit.
their services
So
provided.
this is what we're giving, we can't do this without if we give them setbacks can be big, that can change the building. So we don't want to give anything unless we get B uses. So is your,
You still don't understand the question.
I think what we're looking to do is if you don't meet the minimum threshold to get the benefits of the changes in building height, et cetera, you can have those uses. However, you're still under the current requirements for setbacks, building height, et cetera.
And I don't want to, I mean, we can discuss the finer points of should we or shouldn't we have a minimum mixes and allow under current setbacks. If your recommendation is to allow a mix of uses without taking advantage of the setbacks and building height, then make that as a recommendation so that the board can consider it.
yeah, I would say that makes sense. I mean, yes, that makes sense.
So if you don't hit the threshold, you'd get no benefit other than additional uses.
Yes, that's not what this ordinance allows for, but if that is what your recommendation is, then because you think it makes sense to not give up anything from building height and setbacks and still get a mix of uses, then
Can
make that as a recommendation.
Can we agree on 30% as the trigger, and can we agree to allow, if it's less than 30%, allow the uses, however, they're not going to get any of the benefits. They have to develop under the old code, so to speak.
Can I just, now I recall what the logic for having the minimum, and again, you might not like the minimum and you might choose to, but the logic was there is some reason why we would want to incent it into the B uses. So if we allow, we're not really getting a lot if we allow a 90-10. So we might not be giving anything up either, so you're right. But
so you want to say, in other words, we'll let you all these uses, but you really got to, you got to
so
load
for
on.
better or for worse, and that's, you decide if you think, but for better or for worse, some of the logic of this was we want minimums because on balance, we've decided a sizable amount of the B uses is beneficial for the area. So that's why we set sort of arbitrarily at 30%. If you think that number should be 10%, then that's the sort of thing we would want to hear.
I have to say I agree with Regina, though, in the sense that if you get any B use, it theoretically is reducing traffic.
But not, we need a core amount to make the difference.
You know what it's like? It's like going to the store and you got to spend $200 to get a 5% discount. Okay? You get no discount until you get to $200, but you can still spend less money and buy less things. So what we're saying here is, why would we not say 30% of the building, you get benefits? If you have something less than 30%, we get the benefits and you get nothing.
Okay, then that will be, it sounds like that will be one of the recommendations going to the board.
We got a lot to do. We need to start putting stuff in writing. So can we say then 30% maximum, triggers the minimum, 30% triggers the new ordinance, and that we'll do the, you can, less than 30%, you can do it, but you no trigger.
Right.
I don't think 30 is enough to get a higher building unless it is the percentage of B use is tied to the amount of height or, increased density. Because I really feel we're better off with more B uses than A uses. And I understand you want the character of the office building there. But I think it's more beneficial to us if we keep the office building number lower and, in other words, A uses lower and increase B uses. So I don't think saying you have to have a minimum of 30 in column B.
No.
Am I interpreting that wrong, what you're saying?
Well, in other words, any less than 30% in B, you can't get it. You have to have at least 30% in B. We haven't established a maximum in B, which is what you want to do.
Yes.
But you have to have at least 30% to trigger it.
I'd rather see 40. If we're pushing for less traffic or traffic at times moved around.
I'll tell you what, let's just put a placeholder in for now
Okay.
at 30. We can come back to address it because we have the traffic thing to address as well. Okay? So we'll put a placeholder at 30 for the minimum. So that's actually the maximum. So A
still needs to read up to 100%, I believe, because we have to preserve the existing PLO.
Yeah, but I don't like,
does.
I don't like, do you understand what we're trying to accomplish? I think you should have like a separate definition for what triggers this overlay.
Yes, I get the triggering of the reduced setbacks and increased building heights right now is set at 30%. You're going to revisit it.
Right,
If
so you
somebody-
understand what we're trying to do?
Yes.
Fine.
If
Then you can
somebody
reword
wanted
it.
to come in, if the developer wanted to come in and develop at 90% of office and 10% retail or restaurant, they could, but they're developing under the standard setbacks and the standard building heights.
Okay, that's where we are right now on this issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
One other thing, if I could mention, in Amy's letter, she mentioned some possibilities of changing Bs to As in here because of their traffic. And I think that was several good ideas in there, and I would recommend doing that.
Okay, so this is accessory uses.
Because the commissioners discussed this at some length, what about the 6-acre lot? And somebody comes to us and says, we'd like to put a hotel here. That's it. That's going to change the character of the office park. But that's a very typical use in an office park, to tuck in a stray hotel. You see it over and over. Why would that not be a good idea?
Well, this was the first stab at a commissioner, or at an ordinance amendment, which is why they wanted to send it down here. Again, if that's something that you want to address and allow these types of uses, whether it's 100% for smaller sites at certain uses. I've seen there was an amendment that came out from Fred Fromhold today regarding that specific issue. Again, something for you if that's what you agree in, and that there are certain uses that can be developed on the smaller sites at a higher percentage, then we can make that recommendation and the board would consider it.
And I would think a B use on a smaller site, even if it's 100%, would be a desirable thing in terms of traffic. Yes, it would change, quote, the character, but selectively, depending on the B use, some of those are very, very compatible.
And I
in
think
an
that's what Fred was getting at, was that maybe it's not all the B uses, but some of those, which I believe he then developed into a list of C uses, which was assisted living, hotel, and age-qualified, age-restricted housing.
All right, the board in favor of
Yeah, so I guess along that line, I feel like there's some uses we may want to allow and some we may want to encourage. And so there's a difference between what first of all, obviously we have to keep the office. But the other things that we let in, some of them are more beneficial than others for traffic, and some are beneficial just as amenities for property value, things like that. So those amenity property value, restaurant type accessory use, maybe you don't get any credit to have a higher building height or anything like that, but it's allowed. But then if you look at some of the better traffic ones, those we want to encourage, and then they get more yield on the property. Do you see what I'm saying? Like only the things that significantly reduce traffic should have additional yield as a result of the changes. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's why I go back again to the traffic, the balancing of traffic.
Are we going to get to that, the traffic section?
So I think we have to tie the two together.
Yeah, but we're going to get to that, right?
So A, B, and C, I think, maybe.
Can we make one comment? I think, I may be wrong, but I think there's a misnomer. A number of times, Kathy said, and now you said, that there will be additional development. That's not true. The change in use does not give additional development. There is an overall provision in this ordinance that says maximum 25,500 square feet per acre. That was derived by taking the 475,000 square feet that we sort of kind of agreed, some yes, some no, but we agreed that Biomed could develop. Divided that by 18, the number of acres. So that's the overriding limit on development in this ordinance. You're not, when you go to a B when you go to B, you don't get additional density. You get a different kind of density. You have a greater setback, but you can go up higher. That'll be important for an office building. But there is an absolute cap per acre, and that's just being missed.
That's a good point. The only thing
Let's just discuss traffic neutrality right now, because it's part of it.
Well, are we going to split those uses into 3 categories, or is that something people will be interested in?
We can do that, but I thought you wanted to address that. So you want to split them into 3?
Well,
or now?
Or just eliminate some of them? I don't know, because some of them don't benefit us traffic-wise. Well, certainly the standalone fitness facility.
So, yeah, the bullet point recommendation, Steve, I think we need to add is that 63B3, Indoor Health and Fitness Recreation Center. 2 months ago, we had a recommendation only as an accessory to, I think we only had as an accessory to, like, an office building. It
So
couldn't
like
be
only
its
for
own-
the users of that building? Is that what we were saying? Not open to the public kind of thing?
Right. It was only as an accessory use to, I thought to, pardon?
The occupants of the building.
To the occupants of the building.
Got that one, Kevin? So the indoor health and fitness recreation center is only for use of building occupants.
As an accessory use.
Yes.
Steve, before you guys got off your percentages, though, can you maybe shed some light on what Kathy was talking about, which is how much of the B you can go? You kind of skipped over that. You worked on the back end. We'd love to know what you think a maximum B would be permitted, because you didn't get there, and that you kind of skipped over that issue. But that is an important one, I think, and the board's looking for that guidance as well.
Yeah, we are bouncing around way too much for my comfort level. So I really want to take these one at a time. We're going to nail them down. We may not all agree. They are going to be interrelated somewhat, but then we can come back and see if something we did originally conflicts with something we did next. Can we do that? So I agree. So can we go through this? And can we get your comments later? I can't take any more comments. We're going one by one on this one, and we're going to stick to it. So thank you, David. So we have the 70% with this one.
70% with which one?
Well, list A, 30%.
Okay.
The other flip side is 70%.
Maybe they're going to fix it. I'm telling you, the way I'm reading this article,
I
it
don't-
has to be up to 100%. Hang on. And then we'll fix the mixed use in the later part.
Susan, don't wordsmith it. Don't wordsmith
fine.
it. He knows what we want. He's going to come back. We'll take a look at it, and if he doesn't get it right, we'll correct it then.
Okay.
Okay, because this 100% is fine. He has to add another definition. He has to add a whole new line, and he knows it.
Okay.
I don't want to add it. I don't want to pen it.
I got my B
I don't
here.
want to pen it right now.
I got it.
Okay? We're up to B. What is the maximum we're comfortable with the B uses? The maximum B use that we're comfortable
What
with.
was maximum A? We didn't determine that, did we?
Maximum
The
is
maximum
backward.
A to qualify
Has to be
70%, to qualify 70%. The maximum A to qualify.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. Okay? The maximum to not qualify is 100%. Okay? And there's no, I mean, so between 70 and 100%, you're still allowed to do it, hence your clause.
It should be 70% so that we preserve 30% office space in a mixed use.
Yes.
That's really the number we're trying to come up with is, in mixed use scenario, how much office space do we still want to preserve? And if it's 30, then our maximum is 70. If it's 40, then our maximum is 60. That's the way we need to be
That's
thinking
it.
about B.
So A, that first line should read 70 to 100%. The second line should be 0 to 69%.
How did we get from maintaining 50%
Yeah,
over
I
half?
don't understand
I
this.
thought we were at,
A-
it's a business park.
A
it's
should be
over
30
half.
to 100,
But how did we get to
A is
30
30
all
to
of a
100,
sudden?
I
Right.
like that.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
So that totally changes the
30 to 100.
character.
Yeah.
So then
well,
what should
actually,
B be?
that helps traffic.
0 to 70. Yep, that's right, 0 to 70. That's it.
30 to 70.
30 to 70.
Minimum
you need
office
30%
use of
minimum,
30.
right.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
I'd
that's,
like
it's 30 to 70 to get a benefit, but you could have less than 30. So
Do it either way.
it would be.
No.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
It would have to
Okay.
be.
Are you talking about B now?
But but I think what it should read, and I'm not sure, but I think it should read 0 to 70, but 30% triggers the benefits.
Well, the 30% is already in the ordinance. Yeah.
Okay.
Later.
All right, so it has to be, then it has to be 30 to 70, you're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, unless you want to make it 0 to 70, and the 30 only gets you the mixed use benefit.
Right, that's what I just said. It'd be 0 to 70, but you need 30% to get the mixed use benefits.
Okay, so can you restate that line so that what you're thinking of? And this would be A, list A. A would
So
be
let me ask
I thought we
you
wanted
70%.
50 to begin
John,
with. How did we get
Rice.
to 70?
In the scenario where you just said, John, in the scenario where you just said that list A is 30 to 100. Hang on. In the scenario where John just said 30 to 100%, and I come in and I have absolutely no interest in doing a mixed use, I just want to put up an office building. What am I doing with the first 30%, with the first 29% under that wording? I don't want setbacks, I don't want height.
This is the PLO
This
now.
is the
This is
existing
now the
PLO.
PLO.
This is now
Once
gonna
this
be
is
the
done,
PLO.
this is the PLO.
Susan, you're then assuming that somebody's not developing a portion of their site. If you're going to develop under all office, it's 100% office. You're not going to develop your site at only 10% capacity. Nobody's going to develop a site 10% capacity.
I understand that. I was just simply saying, reading this use regulation, which is going to replace what's in the book right now. And John said,
30 to 100.
right,
You do 100.
So if you're less than 30, that means you're using either another use or you're not developing at 100% capacity.
okay.
So A is 30 to 100. Is that what we're agreed on? Does that mean you could have theoretically 30% A use and 70% B use? Am I understanding you correctly?
The other one is 30 to 70.
I thought we were concerned about having more than 50% be not A use. For a particular reason, one was pointed out that a hotel on a large site. So then you could have 3 hotels on one site. So why did we all of a sudden drop down to 30?
I don't think market forces would let you have 3 hotels on the same big site.
Well, I thought we were trying to maintain it as a business area and keep it at 50. I'm just wondering why all of a sudden became 30.
Well, the commissioners want to keep it as an office park, but one of the uses in an office park, from my standpoint, is a hotel. So let's have 100% hotel. I mean, I would make an exception for a hotel.
That's a small lot. We can't, we're not on small lots now. Okay, let's stick with what we're on.
Well, I'm
in
assuming we're
agreement with you.
above 10 acres.
We're not talking, we were just talking about the ordinance right now. We're not talking about lot size and the exceptions for lot size. That will come later. Just this specific thing, these percentages right now. I'm in agreement with you, Regina. I think it should be 50% as at least 50% office.
The way it is now, anywhere from
But hold on.
50 and to full.
Okay, but so how do we feel about that? Regina and I think 50%. How do you guys think?
As a max.
As the minimum amount of office to maintain that character. We got down to 30% very quickly. But I just feel like 50. Where are you?
I think a lot, for example, medical office building, which could be another use, or it's still going to look like an office building. So if you're looking at the character of the building, you can't tell from the outside appearance of an office building what kind of uses they generally have inside, if it's some sort of
So how do you feel?
commercial use. I would like to see the office part lower.
So
Because
you're
I think,
comfortable with 30?
yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Well,
How are you?
one
On 30?
question there. I
Yeah,
thought we.
I think
I don't want to debate it.
I think
Just tell me how you feel.
if we're so concerned about traffic and how much traffic there is, then we want to get the maximum number of Bs which have less traffic and a minimum number of As which have more traffic. So if you say the
Right, so
list
you
A,
lower it, just
and
lower
it
it.
says list A, all right? So you're only going to be able to take those uses that are in List A that we're going to make, okay? And you got to have somewhere between 30 to 100%. So if we want them to have more, less traffic, we want them to take more people from B list, okay? So we
Okay.
want to make that greater. So we want to make that between 30 and 70. Because if they have 70% from the B list and then only 30% from the A list, we're going to have less traffic from the B list than we're going to have from the A list. You don't want to increase the A list because that's traffic.
Okay. Well, we're trying to balance the character,
Right.
so.
But
so-
that
Okay,
is
so you're with the lower.
I'm with the low.
I just have one quick question with the medical office. That's now under office, isn't it? Medical office is part of A. We no longer have, we eliminated that category.
Office is.
So now,
office.
Kathy, your
But
example
Well, I was thinking,
is A, it's an A use.
yeah.
So that's just, I wanted to make sure that was clear.
The surgery center, for example, that, like, is a B use,
Well, surgery centers.
but it still looks like an office building. Yeah.
Okay, I had one question for John Rice. John, so we're all at 30%. You say 100% office. So if they're 100% office, they're not getting the benefit, right? So it really needs to say 30 to 70. Yeah?
No.
No,
Of
because
the
this
A-list.
is all allowable.
Percentage is handled elsewhere in the code.
It is handled elsewhere? Okay,
Yes.
so, fine. So, okay, so then we can say
Under-
30 to 100 because we're covered elsewhere.
G1 on page 3 will hit that minimum
Okay,
for the mixed uses.
so then we go with the B, and then we go 30 to 70 on the B? 0 to 70. 0 to 70, yeah. 'Cause that has to match. Right. Okay. So, so we're okay on that. We addressed indoor health and fitness recreation. We want that as a accessory use.
No, we don't want it
I just
in
ask
there.
a question. Accessory use, is that open to people outside the occupants of the building?
No.
So that's the definition of accessory use? is
Well,
that it's
no,
only-
Kevin, no, I don't care what we're not going to define it. We're going to tell them it has to be only for the occupants of the building.
Okay.
No outside,
Okay,
no
so
outside,
we
zero.
won't use the term accessory use. We'll just
Let
say
him define
occupants.
it. Yep.
Okay.
I don't want to.
So in other words, B3 should be removed.
Yes, B3 is removed.
No, B3 is contingent
amended.
on it
Somewhere
only
else
being for
here,
the
it
use of
says it
building
can be part
occupants.
of, for example, the hotel or something like that.
If it,
It's an amenity.
The Planning
right.
Commission, you are
Okay.
looking at the indoor recreation as an accessory use, but not as a principal B use.
No, as a use only for the building occupants.
that's what he's saying. That's what it means. Okay, Regina?
Use.
That's what it
It's got to be
means.
moved to C. It's got to be moved to C. It's got to be taken away as B3 and made C.
No, you wouldn't necessarily list it, you'd either list it specifically as an accessory or you don't list it at all.
I would say don't list
Those
it.
types of uses are customarily incidental to a hotel, for example. You don't,
Right.
Okay. So we're fine on that one. So to
Fine
finish,
meaning removing it? I just want it understood.
he knows exactly what we want. And he
you
will
understand?
wordsmith it. I don't want 8 people to wordsmith this document.
I got it.
Okay?
I
got
made my
it.
point?
Yes, your point's been well made, multiple times by multiple people. So let's get down to we're going to do the acreage now.
Hang on a second.
All right.
On the bullet point, it's now been written 3 times. Did we decide that surgical center needs to be defined?
It's not, so it's ambulatory care facility.
So take out outpatient surgical center and rename what would be 6 to ambulatory care facility.
We provided definitions to the town.
And Penn has, and the applicant, one of the property owners has provided it.
And I believe that at the last month's meeting, you were particularly fond of Amy's definition in her letter.
Yep. Staff
so-
has a definition, that makes
Yes.
sense.
Thanks, Susan. How many acres, how many parcels do we have below 10 acres?
Now, hang on, if you're going in order, at C5, the parking
sorry.
structure issue.
Wait, before we even get to C8, why is that listed as a use? Shouldn't that just be like,
Yes. It should be a
It's a separate thing, right? Okay, so how do we manage that? We all know how that's going to work?
We'll
Okay,
manage
because that
it.
doesn't make sense
Yeah,
there.
it's not as,
It's just you can or you can't.
it's not a
I mean,
principal use. right.
Okay, it's not a use, it's an allowable arrangement.
What's that?
How many lots are less than 10 acres? Do we know?
7. No, there's a total of 7, so 3 are greater than 10, so
Four
4.
less.
4. Do we have a census to their sizes?
Somebody does.
I've seen somebody's letter saying 6 acres.
How many? There's 4 lots less than,
There we go.
Here's your PLO.
yeah.
Thanks. You have 4 lots less than 10 acres.
You have to identify yourself.
I'm Mike Pilko. I'm with RHJ Associates. I'm an architect hired by Lloyd Goodman to represent the Radnor Racquet Club.
And how many acres is Lloyd's site?
7.
And how many, do you know have the acreage of the other 3?
Yes, I do.
And would you please tell me?
The current site that PenMed occupies is approximately 7 acres.
Could you just point to that? I think I know which one it is.
It is
Next to the ball field.
that one.
Okay.
The 259 Radnor Chester Road, which is Radnor Fee Owner LLC, is 9 acres. That is Site E here.
Okay.
And 280 King of Prussia Road,
Gotta be a
Schifrin
triangle.
and Borroway Realty is 7 acres. That's parcel F.
Right. Thank you. That was very helpful.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Skip, with your concept now, we have 4 sites. So you still in favor of 4 7-acre sites, basically, being allowed mixed, single use? And I'm not saying you shouldn't be, I'm just asking, is your motion, your thought?
If it's a B-list use, and it's considered compatible with an office park, yes.
I don't think we can do the second part. Oh, thank you. It's a B-list use or it's not. We can't start defining compatible.
Well, we could have a B and C list, somebody said earlier, too.
Yeah, we can have a C list, that's fine.
See this list?
We then also say that you can't subdivide current lots.
Yes, we can have language in there that would make it as of effective the date of this ordinance when it would be adopted, the lots that existed at that point in time, so any future subdivision could not take advantage of that.
Is there any, is that restricting anyone in any unfair way?
No.
No, if I can, that's why I proposed the financial subdivision provision, because if you have a 6-acre lot or a 7-acre lot, and you put 2 permitted uses on there, and you want to have separate ownership, as long as there's a cross easement agreement that makes everything constant, don't restrict ownership. There's no.
I think we're all supportive of that.
Okay, all right.
Agreed.
We
We
don't
can cross
want to
that bullet
have
point
breaking
off.
them
We
down.
support that.
Yes, we support that.
The financial subdivision, I think we were all supportive of
Yes,
that
I agree.
concept. Is everyone?
Yeah. So how does, can we show, anybody see any skeletons on this concept of Skip's?
So just bullet point it again.
I think the smaller lots should have the ability to have a 100% B use. after we define the B list. Or if that is a difficult concept because of character, then we have to have a C list. So maybe the C list just has hotel in it, nothing else. But a hotel use is the right kind of use in an office park. Cuts down on, you go to a meeting in the building and you walk to the meeting and you go back to your hotel. I mean, it's the whole idea of cutting down on traffic. It's like the
Yeah, but then that wouldn't be single use on a single property. But I hear what you're going with that.
Well, I'm saying on a
It
small
could be a
lot, it
hotel
could
on
be.
a single property.
I'm saying on a small lot, it could be a single C list use, which starts with hotel.
With that in mind, so you would see that for hotel. Would you also see that for independent living?
Yes.
Age-targeted housing?
Yes.
And skilled nursing? Would that be our C list?
I guess yes, but that seems.
Those would be the allowed single uses on smaller lots, those 4.
But are you allowing smaller lots?
Existing.
Existing smaller lots.
As of
the date
today,
of the
the date of
ordinance.
the ordinance.
And they would be allowed to take advantage of the new use.
But your financial subdivision is, you're not going to be impacted.
I understand. I just think I think it creates an inconsistency. I think it creates an inconsistency if you draft an ordinance contemplating any use of a smaller lot, but then you set a minimum acreage in the district that is higher than that, even if they are existing. It's creating conflict within your own ordinance. If you're going to allow for use of those smaller lots.
So what is your suggestion?
You can say you can have 7-acre lots, but allowing only lots under 10 acres to utilize all of B uses. But drop your minimum to 7 acres. And
Instead of 10, you mean?
instead of 10, and just pull everything in and just only allow for the 100% B use on the smaller lots. Still retain the 10-acre minimum for the higher uses. But why create the inconsistency in the ordinance where you have lots that don't work and you're drafting towards them?
Because by changing.
Actually, let's have John check in on
Just
this,
think,
right?
because if we changed the ordinance to allow these additional uses and leave out those 3 owners, that's,
No, I don't want to do that either. John, you have any comment on that suggestion about just lowering it to the 7 acres and using the 10 acres as the litmus test?
I don't think you'll have any support, or very little support with the commissioners in reducing that acreage.
Below 10?
Yes,
Okay.
right. I think
Right.
there's a desire, but again, you want to make a recommendation?
All right, we'll make that
a
recommendation.
We'll make
Thank
that.
you.
Let's make that.
You know,
Okay.
but I would also say that I think from the commissioner's discussion is there's always been the concept of retaining the PLO zoning on some percentage, like we're doing on the 10 acres and over, there's that. So if you're talking about just letting the B uses on anything under 10 acres, then you're turning that into a retail, restaurant.
Actually, John, I think we're limited to about 3 uses, which we're going to create or 4 uses in a column C for those items. So,
I'm not seeing the big advantage to lowering the size of the lots, and that we have 4 non-conforming lots in the district. They're going to have rights because they were existing non-conforming lots. And I feel like we are creating a layer of complexity in an ordinance that we were trying to get it to be a little simpler, for one. And 2, I think that we are creating a situation where, do I foresee the day today that these lots could get subdivided? No, but could it happen? Sure, and more than a financial subdivision. And then what do? And you talk about trying to memorialize and remember what's allowed and what's not. I don't see the benefit. I don't see the benefit. The four lots have rights because they are existing nonconformities.
Susan, the lots, those 4 lots that are undersized, the only rights that they have is to retain the existing buildings. But they're not afforded any more additional uses or restricted from uses. There's no rights other than the building setbacks.
We had, but I understand that, but we had, and I think we should just keep the simplicity in here. We had a carve-out for the smaller lots to be able to do a higher percentage of one of the B uses. We've been talking about that for months. We haven't gotten to, Skip proposed his way. I would say we should go back to the language that we had in the work that we've been doing for months, where we were allowing for kind of allocating for the fact that those lots could do a different kind of a mix.
Well, that's
But I
basically
would agree with
what we're
Dave
proposing
in when
here.
he says that you're subject to this, but then if you're under this, then you can do that. You don't get past go when you say you're less than 10 acres. So if you can't get past go, you can never go to the provisions below it, because if you don't meet the minimum threshold of the 10 acres, then you don't get to do what's underneath of it unless it's what's currently there. So it is a valid point to bring in all the parcels, and then the parcels that are 10 acres and above, you get to do this wonderful mixed use with the reduced setbacks, building height. Those that are less than that, you can either develop by right under the PLO, or develop, as Skip was saying, 100% of hotel, age-restricted, assisted living.
Yeah, that's what I think that makes.
Can we go the C-list route? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
So,
All right, so the C-list, Skip?
Age-restricted housing, hotel.
Kevin, you're getting this, I'm assuming?
It would be
and
one.
assisted living.
1, 4, 5, and 7, I think we said. 1 hotel, 4 skilled nursing, 5 independent living. Is that correct? And 7, the age-targeted housing. So those 4 would be broken off into a C list that would be available at 100% to the lots existing.
That are under 10
Under
acres.
10.
Was skilled nursing part of that, or we were just doing the more residential type?
No, skilled.
I think skilled nursing was
Okay,
one of them
that's-
too, right?
Yep.
Because those are the 4 that have significant traffic reductions.
Now, do they get the benefit of the setbacks and the height?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. It's a recommendation, not a.
So we're okay with that? We're accessory uses now?
So with it, then we are taking the lot size down to the 7 acres.
No,
No,
No.
no change in lot size.
we're not changing it. So we're up to C's, accessory uses?
I'm sorry, can you go back the no change in lot size?
No
Or-
change in lot size.
So the
That-
minimum acreage for the PLO is still 10 acres.
Still 10 acres, but on the 4 lots, I guess.
But you don't get to the 4 lots if you have a minimum.
So then we're going to have to lower it to 7 acres. So, in order to do that.
Okay, and then we
But the
could
10
have-
will be the high water marker, the trigger point.
And we would have provisions in there that it's only subject to those lots that are existing at the date of this ordinance, because then we're only talking about 3 potential subdivisions, one with the Penn Medicine site, which we know is going to be coming in for a subdivision, so you would basically have an unknown for 2, which we can write into the ordinance, would not apply.
Wait, I thought we're saying we don't want to allow for any lots under 10 that aren't already existing. How do we make that the condition?
We got it.
Okay, I lost that.
I would suggest that you use 6 acres as your minimum, because depending on how the lot size is interpreted, some of these have a gross lot area of 7 acres, but a net lot area of less than 7 acres, but all of them are greater than 6 acres. Thank you.
But I don't think we're having a new lot size anyway.
About the existing lot.
So it is what it is.
No matter what the size.
It doesn't matter. It's just less than 10.
Just existing lots.
Yeah.
We'll just make it those existing lots. So we're up to accessory uses. C?
We're not.
No, we're not. What did we miss?
Where are you reading accessory uses? Oh, see, that was already as part of Article 3. You were area and height regulation. When you just changed it to 6 acres, I was already on 64A. Because that's where it's written.
Yeah, well, we just covered it,
Okay, so then, wait a second, because in
So
in D, I thought we were going in order.
Where are you?
Area and
I'm
height,
not there.
isn't
I'm
that
not
where you
there.
were?
I'm
Why'd you
not.
just change it to 6
Because I didn't know where that was,
Oh, well, that's where we are.
right? Because everybody else is going out of order. It's my turn to go out of order. They're not dated, that's why I have a different one.
Steve, can I get some just clarification on the C use? Just to verify what Skip was intending. For the smaller sites, so the C list is for those sites that are less than 10 acres as they exist today, or at the time of adoption. Are
As they exist today.
As they exist today, or when this ordinance is passed. When those sites would be developed, are there any provisions for increased setbacks and building height? So those smaller sites are or are not subject to reduced setbacks and increased building heights?
My thought was that they would get the same incentives that the larger lots would get for B uses because we're getting the traffic reduction that we all want.
And I don't
But
see
they
a
also
whole
have the
lot of
setback.
hotels being established at 38-foot height. But
Well-
I wanted to
well,
clarify that.
There are, we did have some setbacks that favored the smaller lots. So I guess you have to somehow incorporate that into the incentives for people opting for 100% C use on a small lot.
Maybe it shouldn't go as high on a small lot.
What, I mean, what,
I think it already doesn't, or didn't.
Just for building height perspectives, if you look at the property, I think it's 201 King of Prussia, right at the intersection of King of Prussia and Radnor Chester. That's at about 105 feet to the top where the cell antennas are then mounted to. No building is going to be higher than that. That, again, I think we haven't talked about it yet, but this ordinance is talking about an 85-foot building height. So that is kind of the threshold of, the tallest building that you're going to see in that district.
I think most buildings that are in that C thing are 4 stories. Most any of those hotels you go in, like the Hamptons, most of them are 4-story buildings.
Yeah, I'm not in favor. I don't know that I'm in favor of all those incentives. On smaller lots. I mean, I'll tell you, so 3 of the 4 smaller lots are butt up against residential.
Well, I wanted to talk about setbacks against residential when we got to that.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty, is that we went through all of that and made sure that we were comfortable with the increased setbacks, but now where are we with
all out
any
the
of
window.
that? So it's
Well,
kind of,
we will address setbacks.
so I think that's why Kathy's got this concern about the height, is because before we had increased setbacks, especially with residential.
Well, can we address those when we get to them?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
They get to use.
So, Skip, leave it as, Kevin, we're just going to leave that as an open marker for a moment. Okay, please leave it as an open item. We will come back to it. So Susan, go ahead. Where are we?
I just, there was a suggestion to change the definition of the parking structure, and I would suggest that it's at the bottom of that page, C5. And I personally would leave it. We do not want to create a backdoor where people get,
So what do you want to say?
I want to leave it just the way it is. I'm saying that, I'm alluding to the fact that there was a suggestion from an applicant, from one of the property owners, to change that definition, and I still think that it, 3 property owners.
Can I augment that?
Sure.
So there's uncertainty in the definition, meaning that the staff has taken a position that would be considered favorable to the applicant. The board has expressed my opinion is the board has expressed a concern. I've expressed the concern that was just expressed. And so I think what the applicant wants is to have the language revised to eliminate the uncertainty and have that uncertainty cut in a way that is advantageous to the applicant. I think it would be very problematic from the township's perspective to take the uncertainty and resolve it in a way that is beneficial to the applicant and problematic for the township. So that's my reason for silence on this, is that if we refine it and we refine it in a manner that extends property rights to the applicant at the expense of the township, I think that that's problematic.
May I Commissioner, you and I had a long discussion about this. I understand your position. You said it very, very clearly. The only thing that I would like to add is what I think we talked about last month, that the concern of getting additional density by putting everything underground, the fail-safe on that is what I said 20 minutes ago. You've got the overall 25.5 or 25,500 square foot per acre. So there is no way to gain additional density over what is allowed under the ordinance. But that's
And what's the harm in keeping it? I don't understand that I don't think there's ambiguity.
It's total confusion. There's a position taken by the staff in one memo, and when Biomed changed certain things in their plan, there was a different position. So it's disconcerting for us when we're planning, as the plan that you've seen, practically all of the parking for the hotel, for Penn, and the office building underground. It's in structure. I'm sorry, not underground, but structure. It's just confusing. And I understand what Commissioner Curley is saying, and I'm not going to fight about that. But as I see it, the protection against additional density is not some strange definition of parking garage, but an overall number of square feet per acre.
I'm going to recommend we keep it. You know, this is the thing, I think I pulled it out 2 years ago. It was our protection against Biomed 2 years ago. I don't see how it harms an applicant. They're going to build their buildings. Either way, this is not the thing that's going to limit them. You know, I see it the same.
Anybody else
Charlie does.
have a difference of opinion? All right, okay, so we'll keep it as is. What's next, Susan?
Actually, I like Mark Kaplan's approach.
Which is what?
But we'll let staff work it out.
Okay.
Basing it on the maximum amount of square footage per acre allowed.
To Kathy's point, when this was drafted, there was no floor area cap. The only protection you had was this language. You've now added in on the back end a floor area cap. No matter how people skin this thing, they're never going to go above 25.5. It's the lock-solid protection the township never had on density. So now you've created.
Got to find out from Don.
Dave, does that lock solid cap though is based upon parking that is below ground, and so if you
it's everything. It's no matter what, above
okay,
ground,
right.
below ground.
But when we got to that number,
Yep.
we came to that number from the 475, which envisioned the structured parking below ground. If that is not the allowable interpretation, then the amount of building that can be built gets considerably smaller. So,
But remember, we've relaxed the impervious, we've increased the impervious coverage ratio. So now, in order to get this cap, you've got to create more green space.
yes, which is why it's a ceiling, it's a cap. So if the township makes the less favorable interpretation, then the cap is moot. It's irrelevant because it's so high it doesn't apply. If the township makes the interpretation that it has made on the previous applications, then the cap becomes applicable for the reasons that you just said.
Exactly right.
The question for you all, as I see it, is do we resolve the uncertainty in the way that the applicant wants, or do we leave the uncertainty in its current form? My opinion is that the uncertainty is protective of the township. So that was my reasoning for not changing the definition of parking structure. But again, that's for you to decide.
Let me try and make the last comment. Penn and Brandywine are working on a plan. You've seen the plan. It does everything that the idea of this PLO amendment accomplishes. It gets the hotel, it gets the ambulatory hospital with less traffic. And now, when we go to develop, and we had to spend God knows what on engineering, we've got to wait until we do all that engineering to determine which interpretation is going to be used. That's not great from our point of view. It's going to put an additional step in the middle of our development process, more months and more determinations. But look, we want to get this ordinance done in the fashion that Commissioner Curley has suggested. So I'll take 3/4 of a loaf instead of the whole loaf, but understand we're going to be back on this issue.
We're going to keep it the way it is. Next, Susan.
Well, we changed the thing about lot area at 64A.
Right,
On
next.
C, I have a note from a month ago or so that, and I wanted to ask John Rice about this. Building placement, I have a note with a question mark. 64C on page 4, no building or accessory structure shall be located less than 100 feet from A, and the notation I have in question mark is proposed, from a proposed street right-of-way line. Is that a protective line, word to add in there? Yeah, if the street were, if the shape of the, I think it was back in a time when we were, then, you know, the shape of the road might have changed with traffic improvements, and perhaps none of that's going to happen, so I'm not sure that on.
Might be existing or proposed. I mean, either, if that's a setback line, if you're going to create a new street right-of-way line, then you'd want that.
So it should say from a proposed, and if the street.
Existing or proposed.
Right, so we should add in the words existing or proposed before the word street. Under building placement.
It does not address residential setbacks here.
This is just building placement, Kathy.
Well-
The setbacks are in another area. Setbacks are a different spot.
But it does say 50 feet from a side or rear property line here, so shouldn't it be?
adjacent to a non-residential.
Yeah, but we aren't addressing residential.
I think we will later on.
Okay, you don't need to do it here, too?
Just put it.
I have a question mark here. All right.
64C, the intent is to keep that as it's currently under the PLO. So if you're doing a by right PLO development, you stick with the standard setbacks. The reduced setbacks then come in, different setback provisions come in under the mixed use, which is then where you can talk about either reduced setbacks or possibly increased setbacks if you're against a residential use.
Then moving on to D, the note I have written here just has to do with, and it comes from, I think we had more elaborate wording in Steve Gabriel's ordinance, but my note here is that the offsets need to be more delineated. In the original ordinance, which largely this one is, it just says that the facade has to be visibly offset from the adjoining building, and I think we've had these conversations. Actually, it came up with the biomed plan that didn't end up coming to fruition, where they had very minor offsets, and the overall look of the building was quite huge. And since we're going with the more simplified version of the ordinance, do we need to bring back in some wording about more delineated offsets? It's just a note I have here if we're going to make a memo to the Board of Commissioners, and I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
So you're looking for a minimum offset?
So I don't know what the right amount is. I guess I could look back through Steve's stuff. I just know that that's something that we lost by going back to this pared-down version of the ordinance. And it's been an issue, you know, what constitutes an offset, visual offset? We've had, you know, Villanova had that same issue. At the end of the day, their offsets weren't that great.
About 10%. 16 feet.
I'm going to look through to see what his was. If you want to keep going, I'm raising it as issues that were on my papers of things to bring into the conversation.
One F, it says 35 feet riparian. I want to bring it up again. I think it should be greater. Minimum of 50. Technically, I think it should be more if you look at what the current standards are on that. But at minimum, I would say 50 feet rather than 35.
I completely agree.
I know you agree, Regina. So, okay. I'm with 50, so that's fine. Yep.
No, keep going.
On G, where you get into mixed use, do you want to use the word may there as opposed to must?
Change it to must.
Okay. And moving on, G, if there's nobody else putting their 2 cents in, where you get to taller buildings, I think we should have more of a setback where it abuts a residential property. Where do you see that?
Yeah, it was supposed to be 200 feet, right, Skip?
Yeah, it's a residential.
Okay. Oh, that's fine.
Hang
on.
Steve, I'm putting a pin in something about this.
Okay.
For just a minute, till we get through our stuff.
That's it on this ordinance, except in Amy's letter, I like the, as I mentioned, changing some A's to B's and B's to A's.
Or Cs.
And C's, yes.
Well, so that gets to my point. So where we have to ask staff to do some different wording for G to distinguish the fact that we've come up with a 63B and a 63C. And G1, you know, if the wording of that needs to be changed or amplified, Kevin, you're going to be working on that just to make it very clear that that's the trigger for the mixed use and for the additional setbacks, right? You were going to
In terms
tweak
of
that?
the amendment, the way I envision this is discussing the parameters of what you're talking about. The board will then weigh in on that and then direct staff to create the actual ordinance language. So again, we're probably back more in the general to, you know, give the concepts of all of these items to the board. So you're envisioning under G, you know, having an A, B, and C list. So the recommendation to the board would be that if the board is okay with that concept, then, you know, they would be directing staff to revise the ordinance so that it then reflects those points that they agreed with you on, and it would come back down to you for further consideration, to then further refine the actual ordinance language versus wordsmithing it now.
Okay, Kevin, you got F, riparian buffer 50 feet.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, and you got the must, made a must in the first sentence of G?
Yes, in
Okay, good.
essence, the thought is to, if you're going to do a mixed use, you must meet these parameters.
Right.
Got
Okay. And then we're going to add residential setbacks on the 85 feet to 200 feet. We talked about a setback next to a residential zone. If you get it to an 85-foot building of 200 feet, we don't notice it anywhere here?
Residential uses and not residential zoning districts? Because that was actually an
Yes,
issue that.
residential zoning district.
Well, there's a distinction there.
Okay.
And I guess I'll refer to the chart that's up on the screen, particularly parcel F. If you have a 200-foot setback from a residential district and not a use, the rear of parcel F is Brandywine's Radnor Financial Complex, and there is a strip of a residential district back there. So now you are impacting parcel F and requiring an increased building setback against a commercial use versus a commercial district. So there's definitely an issue because of the way that parcel was developed and rezoned many years ago. They did a ring of R1 zoning around that corporate complex. If you specify increased setbacks against a residential district, it's going to have a different effect than if you had it against a residential use.
We're concerned about people's homes, so what do you recommend?
So it's the residential use and not the district.
Okay.
So there's
Because
no.
you have, on those parcels, particularly parcel F, the rear yard is a commercial use with residential zoning, because it's split zoned. You're concerned about the side yard of parcel F. You
Like
want the
Radnor
increased
Way, for
setback.
example.
I'm sorry?
The houses on Radnor
Yes.
Way is an example.
So you want it from the residential use and not the residential district?
Okay.
Because Radnor Way isn't in a residential district.
Yes, but the Radnor Financial Complex is in a partial residential district.
Well, what about Cardinal O'Hara that is being used as a school now, but is actually zoned residentially? If we don't say residential use, residential district, then someday if that ever converts to residential, it doesn't have
Carol.
protection.
Carol?
Oh, did I say Carol? I meant O'Hara. Carol.
Carol.
Carol,
You said
Carol,
O-
it's R1.
You said O'Hara.
Oh, I was thinking Springfield. So that's it's a residential zone, but not being used residentially.
That's a bit of a concern there.
I care less about that because because then, if they develop next to a zone that they don't like, they shouldn't move there.
So wait, existing,
Well, no,
it's residential.
Susan, to address your concern, and I think, Steve, you're getting to this, what gets developed first? If the school gets developed and its residential uses, then the increased setback would apply. If the school doesn't get developed first and Brandywine were to redevelop 100 Madison Ford Road, a developer then coming in to develop that school property would then know that there is Office Park right across the street, across a right-of-way. So again, the right-of-way is going to provide some additional buffering there. And then they could provide some protection for their future homeowners by setting the houses back a little bit. So the developer of that parcel, if it's sold and if Brandywine were to redevelop 100 Madison Ford Road, I don't think we need to be as concerned about a potential residential subdivision against a potential redevelopment and scraping of a site. I'd be more concerned about the Radnor Way parcels and keeping it as a residential use.
Okay.
And what was that? It was increased to 200 feet?
200 feet. And that was the building setback.
Correct.
What about in the 38 to 55 height? Did we have any additional setback for residential in that range? Originally, did we have something there?
I think it was in Steve's.
Because more than
I
38
don't
is
recall.
is
I've
is
seen the 200.
not allowed now, so.
The 200 was 85 feet. I don't recall. I think, okay.
Do we
Steve
need-
just said 200 for the 85-foot.
Do we need anything for residential
Or maybe
between
150 or
38 and
55?
55? What is the current requirement? It's 100? From residential?
In the new ordinance, I think it's not broken out as to
So we don't-
residential, but we're recommending it.
Yeah, she's concerned about the 55-foot.
150? 100? 150. 125.
Okay, 55 feet to 85 feet is 150 feet. We'd like a setback from 55 feet to 85 feet at 150 feet?
That's a relaxation.
That's 85.
That's a relaxation of what I had proposed.
Oh, okay, what'd you propose?
And it's less than what the applicant had indicated they would agree to.
What'd you propose? I'm sorry.
So,
Okay.
Okay, 200 then, Don? Is that correct?
All right.
Okay, I agree.
I just don't see where that was proposed, though.
Let me see if I can summarize. Any building height above the current standard of 38 feet against a residential district, the setback is 200 feet.
Perfect.
Residential use.
Residential use.
Residential use.
Residential use.
They were your words.
I knew what I said, what I meant.
No, that's why we're adding it. Okay, what else do we have before we go back to pick up our pins?
Is traffic neutrality a pin?
Yeah, it is a pin. I know it's a
Where,
big
how
pin.
far did we get here? Are we done with Article 3?
We've done our first pass of this.
Because in Article 3, I would say Article 3, number 3, I guess.
It's letters, not numbers.
Sorry, I'm confused. Right before Article 4, we'll say, number 3. The 25,500 was based on that 475 plan that had underground parking.
Right.
Are we okay with this number? Because that plan relies on underground parking. And so that consideration of a by right plan is a little far-fetched, in my opinion. I mean, that number's pretty high. So
Well,
if we
I
don't
think
have traffic
underground-
neutrality, I'm not good with this
Okay.
number. That's
Underground
where-
parking's really expensive. I'm not sure that most developers would go that route.
I'm not encouraging
necessarily.
underground parking. What I'm
Yeah.
questioning is the 25,500
But
figure.
You said that to get to that number, they'd have to rely on underground
That's how they
parking.
got to that number, with a plan that proposed underground parking.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not comfortable with that number if we don't have a traffic neutrality figure in here.
We did discuss,
That's not totally.
but we just got to get a little more progress here. Thanks. We, at one time, discussed, traffic reduction. So personally, I'd like to see an overall reduction and a better balancing. Maybe not a huge reduction, but some reduction and an improvement in the balance as well.
Are you
So-
talking about existing conditions today, or what it would be if it were built as right?
No,
by
as,
right?
if built as what we're
By right.
calling right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what we're aiming for with these different uses.
I think we need that assurance with a traffic study, and that proves that the proposed development meets those requirements.
Regina, earlier you said you wanted a 5 or 10% reduction.
Yeah, I think also, if we're going to have increased overall daily traffic, you have to decrease the peak in some proportion.
Well, we're going to get, but remember, this is assuming everything's built out, maxed out right now. So that's the number, that's our current, that's the.
What's
one we're-
allowable.
What's allowable. So I guess I would just like to see at the absolute worst case, an improvement in the balance of some percentage. But can we do that?
I can tell you
Kevin?
from the traffic neutrality concept, I think it's a great concept. Steve can talk more about how it's been applied out in the real world. But I think from, if we were to adopt that type of concept in an ordinance, the initial go-around of getting uses in a new development site is fine. It's what happens when there is a turnover from a low-intensity retail use to a high-intensity retail use, and it's the same use. Are you going to end up having buildings that, for some reason, can't be fully occupied because of a concept that makes it very difficult to enforce? So I think long-term enforcement is very challenging on that type of ordinance. I'm not aware of any municipalities that have that type of ordinance implemented. I know that was something that Steve came up with, and he's here tonight because you guys had asked, you were working with him on the last version to maybe expand upon that concept, because it's great conceptually. I don't know real world applying it, how that's going to play out. Short term, okay. Long term, I think it's problematic.
And can I augment that with the intent for this change is not traffic neutrality. The intent is traffic reduction. And Amy has indicated that the B uses, with the exception of restaurant, would produce either the distribution that you identified, Regina, or a reduction. So you get the reduction in traffic from shifting to the B uses.
Only if the current, it hinges on that 25,000 figure. So with that 25,000 figure in mind, that's a lot different than saying the current build-out traffic versus the proposed build-out traffic.
So who knows but I don't think it hinges on the 25,000 figure at all. I think the 25,000 is a figure, or a cap, meaning, and all these things are put in place to facilitate a mixture of uses that we believe will be desirable. And then the 25,000 is there to protect against the concern that many commissioners expressed, that we're letting the buildings get bigger, and if we let the buildings get bigger, then there will be more traffic. So what the cap says is that the traffic can't get any bigger than the plan that had, for all intents and purposes, de facto approval, and it will be, the traffic will certainly be less and beneficial to the township if we adopt some percentage of the B uses. That's the logic behind this. That's what we're trying to make happen, or at least that's what I'm trying to make happen.
We're going from size of building to traffic, and I think it's tricky because the key to success here is that the traffic does not increase and that it actually reduces. And so I'm not comfortable with the 25,500 figure because I don't see that that's a true number as to what's allowable under our current ordinance, because that requires underground parking to get to that number. So if that number comes down to a lower number, then I'd be okay with keeping this the way it's written. And I think that number is definitely lower than that 475 that we saw.
But Regina, I can tell you that from a traffic neutrality concept, on the larger sites, you are talking, I did rough numbers and I don't have them with me. See if I can go back through my notes. But a sizable increase in the overall gross square footage, and I'll just use 100 Madison Ford Road, of I think you're about 2 million or so square feet of.
I think Randy Wine's total on all its buildings is about $1 million.
$1.8 million, 2 million gross square footage, that you were in excess of 3.5 to 4 million square footage under the strict calculations on the traffic neutrality. So if you're concerned about sizes of buildings, in theory, under traffic neutrality concept, you could achieve significantly more building area than you would when you have a cap in place. So then what happens when you have buildings that are 3.5, 4 million square feet, and all of a sudden you can't fill them because one tenant goes out, the next tenant comes in, and now you're looking at a whole lot of vacancies, and I think that is extremely problematic.
Okay, so one issue that's talk about vague that we didn't address is, and I think it was addressed in an earlier version, is how the parking structures are calculated with regard to building impervious coverage. How, in this ordinance, how are we handling an above-ground parking garage with regard to impervious coverage and building percentages? Because it's not, talk about something that's not clear, that's not clear in this ordinance.
Right now, the ordinance is not addressing it, so it would be left to the interpretation that has been since I've been involved in this.
Right.
And we'll go back to the 475, that was a by right zoning compliant plan. That was my determination 3 years ago, and it's my determination now.
So they weren't even, so the fact that parking structures are not well defined in any of our zoning, in fact, this was the only place they were kind of defined at all. It's not clear whether.
It's not a building, it's a structure.
Right, but does that structure count towards impervious coverage?
Yes. Yes, it always has.
But not towards the building percentages of 30%?
Correct. It's not a building.
And not toward the 25.5 per acre?
25.5 per acre, I believe, is a gross square footage for a building. I'd have to go back and double check in here, but.
Right. So I'm saying, so we can end up with a whole lot more visual buildings on the, visual structures on the ground without having parking garages included in the building percentages. Just saying it's not clear.
So you're basically looking at massing on the site of buildings at the 25.5 plus parking structures.
So visually, we're going to end up with a whole lot more massing.
But you also have some spatial limitations that are going to bring that massing back down.
Yes, no, I understand that. I'm just saying that since we know they exist, since we know the vagueness exists, should we give some thought to, or maybe put a note in the, how do they want to handle this?
I don't think it is vague. So, because you have a lot coverage. In Commissioner Curley's chart, you have a specific lot coverage number. That includes your parking garage. No, lot coverage goes from 55% down to 45%.
50.
No, because that's your first drop. Your current existing is 55. So you're dropping from 55 for lot coverage, which includes your parking garage, down to 45. So there is less building coverage, or I'm sorry, less lot coverage. That's significant. On the Penn site, it's an acre of additional green space. So that, it is addressed. And so I think there's a couple different, you're right, absolutely, that it's not a building coverage issue, but this section of the ordinance doesn't deal with building coverage. It talks, I mean, it deals with both building and lot coverage. And the big drop here is lot coverage, which includes your garage.
I want to, Susan.
It's a 10%.
Susan, Regina, I'm going to address this comment to you. It's my observation after watching this for 3 years that Biomed got its approval of 475,000 square feet of general office building space here. That's an approved or an almost approved plan. I'm going to try and say this as nicely as I can. If you keep adding more and more things to make it difficult for Penn and Brandywine to build what I think is a very handsome plan that we showed you, then at some point, Penn and Brandywine are not going to be able to do what you want us to do, and you're going to have a Biomed, big, huge monster there with all general office. So please, 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 every time that Regina says, I don't like 25.5, every time that Regina says that I really don't believe that it's 475, I sit here and I cringe. I saw it. I watched the approval process. They have a plan that got approved, and that's sitting out there. And it's a reality, and we're trying to collectively do something much, much better with a mix of uses. You've seen the plan. Please let us do it.
Right. So back to lot coverage. So Regina, we're going to have to cover it on uses. I mean, as opposed to, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Traffic neutrality. We're just going to cover it by use as opposed to by.
Well, the one thing is, if we're doing this type of redevelopment, we're going to require a traffic study. And that traffic study is required to show the change in traffic from existing to proposed. I mean, it's not that much more to show, to add on to that you can't mitigate that, you can't lessen the roadway. You can say that you have to prove that you haven't increased it.
But Regina, with that one, you're going to be taking Biomed, which is half, not even half full, and comparing it, you're not going to be able to do neutrality. I mean, just on a traffic.
No, she's talking about from maxed out.
It's not traffic count, it's like what's existing.
Yeah.
So they have to do the studies anyway. That's why, I mean, maybe Amy can propose something to us that makes sense, that's simplified, that would put some protections in.
Who's in favor of trying to go the traffic, trip generation study route versus the trying to handle this via use? Because I think that's a conceptual thing, right? I mean, I'm in favor of handling via the traffic neutrality via use as opposed to your approach. So I guess I'd like, before we debated it, if we need to debate it more, we can debate it more, but if people have an opinion, then could we just understand what it is?
I think the use, I mean, that's why we spent an hour earlier figuring A, Bs, and Cs. I think that's the way to go. Well, I agree with you, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, Kathy?
I think it's easier to track.
Use? Okay, Skip?
Use.
Use.
I don't see that they're mutually exclusive. I don't, but because neutrality came from use. I think that's my struggle with it. I don't see how they're mutually exclusive. but, you know, that's only.
I think, I agree with Kevin. I think it's an enforcement issue. The other thing is IT constantly changes how they do studies. So if they change a study and makes it more liberal or better or worse for us, do we have to go with the new study or the old study? And I think the enforcement is, you know, a change of use is very difficult. And I just think it's a lot easier to do it the way it is.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
Well,
I don't see it as an issue.
Just to clarify, I mean, I don't think they've really changed on how, I think it's pretty consistent, it's been consistent how they analyze traffic. However, if you have different uses in a category, one may be more severe than the other as far as traffic, but you're giving them both the same square footage under this proposed. So say from category B, there's one that has double the amount of traffic of the other. You're giving them the same square footage either way. So that's why the traffic neutrality or traffic balance or whatever through a traffic study comes into play. So if you were to pick one that's way less intensive, then you'd get more space. If you pick one that's on the higher side, you'd get less space, rather than putting this flat number that came out of a plan that required underground parking.
And Regina, the staff's, well, we won't speak for staff, my concern is not the first go-round. The first go-round, you can do all the calculations you want and set it up. It's the second tenant that comes into that space. So if you approve a plan that then has that lesser traffic impact and it's the same use, and a new user comes in with higher traffic, are you going to tell them no? And then is the site going to stay vacant? That's the problem with looking at this traffic neutrality concept in 15 and 20 years when you're getting a turnover of tenants. What is going to happen to that space if the property owner cannot find a viable tenant that meets an arbitrary number set up 20 years ago to fill that space? Is it going to be vacant? And that becomes problematic when you start getting vacant spaces in your municipality that can't be filled because of an ordinance provision.
Does anybody have any change of vote? All right, then we're gonna go with it the way it is. Yeah, with use. So, all right, does anybody have any pins from earlier that we need to come back and address?
Articulation with design standards were not put into the ordinance. It was a note in the back of our May packet. And I think it's not that I want to go over all the details of it. I think that I would, my bullet point would be to ask the Board of Commissioners, do they want to give further consideration to some of the facade articulation issues that had been discussed when you're talking about big buildings? I don't have an answer to that. It's the point.
So whether
to put
it's
forth to the
10% or 15% or 5% relief.
In terms of a length of a building when it turns 90 degrees? Or,
yeah,
because there was other articulations in the building that you go up so far, then you step back and you go up and you can.
So Steve had a big, again, I don't know where, it wasn't incorporated into the ordinance. There was some stuff about vertical and/or horizontal articulation. Is it too complex to articulate?
Personally, I think that's too complex. I agree with if you're going to have a long facade of a building that you offset that, and we provide specific standards for that. But when you start getting the vertical, you're going to go up and then start setting back. I think
Well, no, that's what I'm talking about, is what you just said, is the simpler version of that.
The horizontal.
The horizontal, like
Yes.
we did for the CICD, and we had
Yes.
an initial
Correct. It's just not provided for. I don't think it's specific enough in the version that we got tonight, and all I'm suggesting is, can we make a note to the Board of Commissioners, do they want to incorporate a little bit more specificity on
And I
that?
think for the purposes of tonight, if that is something that the Planning Commission wants to do, then you would make a recommendation that the board consider varying the horizontal plane of the building for however long the building, pick a number, 160, 200 feet. There's been a couple different numbers that have been thrown out that a building gets so long, and I think the 160 is probably a little bit too short with modern architecture. people aren't really building those types of buildings anymore anyway.
So it's just that the articulation as it's currently written, it just says that it be visibly offset by 90 degrees, but it doesn't give any kind of depth or length.
So it would sound like you're making a recommendation to revisit and provide specific dimensional criteria for relief.
Correct. That is, do we have support for that? Yes, we would like to do that.
Yes. Any other pens?
Steve, I have one, and that was for sites less than 10 acres when you're going to develop at 100% of the C uses. Are those uses going to be subject to the reduced setbacks and increased building heights, or subject to the current PLO setbacks? And I think you may have started to talk about that because the concern was reduced setbacks on the smaller sites adjacent to the residential.
But we did cover that with
but
the...
you covering that, so
Right.
I don't want to assume that if
Yeah.
you're not adjacent, you still get the reduced setbacks, which I would be supportive of. But again, that's your recommendation.
I would be okay with just treating them the same as everyone else. In other words, they could get those, the height, but they have to do the setbacks, everything else.
Well,
Increased setbacks, yeah.
where do we spell out reduced setbacks?
Increased setbacks, I said it the wrong way. Increased. 200 feet? That we added
What
it.
is Kevin referring to with the reduced setbacks? Are we
Well,
allowing
for-
reduced setbacks if you have mixed use?
Yes.
No,
from the-
increase, I
from-
thought it
from
was
the-
increased setbacks.
Increased,
As it
no,
goes
reduced
taller.
setbacks of the property line.
Where is that?
Kevin, what are you saying?
He wants to know, I think his question had to do for these new C uses on the smaller lots, are they going to get the benefit of the dimensional reduced setbacks that you get if you do a mixed use?
Yeah, she doesn't know what they are.
Where are the reduced setbacks
They're in
spelled
the
out?
ordinance, the last page of the ordinance. All right.
We don't have that. It must have been an earlier draft.
No, I don't see it.
We never got that version.
We don't have that.
We've had it in the past, I just don't recall what they are.
Well, they're not in what we're reviewing.
Agreed.
If they're not in here, we can't give them a suggestion, but
Well, I think we need to
I think
discuss
we
them if
need
they're
to
going to be a
address
part
it
of it.
before we can give a suggestion.
Yeah.
I don't even understand how we don't have that. It's this chart.
I believe that they were consistent with what Steve Gabriel's last version of, and that was against a non-residential, it went down to 50 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, the setbacks were not changed from the recommendations. That's correct, Dave, right? That's your, yeah. So the setbacks as proposed, the difference between this version and the previous version is in the previous version, the setbacks were changed to the dimensions that Steve identified. In this version, the setbacks are changed to the dimensions that Steve identified, but only if you trigger the mixed use.
Anything else like that that's not showing up in this copy that we're working off of? Because that,
This isn't the final.
Yeah.
but I mean, we're not even commenting on that because we didn't even see it here. What else is missing?
But I believe that was, from my understanding, when it was initially looked at, that the reduced setbacks were consistent with what you had previously agreed with, the version that you were working with Steve Gabriel on.
Yeah, nobody has suggested changing setbacks from the version that Steve Gabriel identified. That's my recollection. Dave and Mark, if you think it's different. Steve, do you?
Yeah, but that doesn't address residential. It doesn't address
Yeah, but
residential.
if the residential's different, it's more protective. That might be the change. Yes, the residential is more protective because the residential stayed at baseline, meaning right now the baseline is 200 feet. And so we provided this version provides the flexibility, but it does not provide that flexibility at residential. So the change that you made tonight will change residential district to residential use. And if that change is adopted, it will be even more restrictive or more protective because there's a residential use that is proximate that's not in a residential district. Is that accurate, Kevin?
Yes.
Steve?
and I've hesitated coming up because I know you've got a lot on your plate here, but as far as the setbacks go, in the case of I understand Commissioner Curley's desire and the baseline protection of the 200 feet setback when you're next to the residential. But when you look at a couple of the properties, the smaller properties that are up there, when you pull in building lines by 200 feet adjacent to the residential uses, they have no place to build, which was why in our version we had those residential setbacks increased from what was being allowed for non-residential adjacency to 100 feet, so that there was still a building envelope within which the smaller lots could build. But then we also required a buffer planting strip in that 100 feet, much like the CICD does, that requires an immediate and complete visual screen. So you combine a 100-foot setback distance with the planter buffer strip with that visual screen as a method to protect the residential properties while still allowing for a building envelope on a couple of those smaller ones that are hemmed in by residential uses. Just an alternative direction, but I certainly understand Commissioner Curley's and the board's desire to protect residential, as much as possible.
So 100% accurate. I understood and agree with everything. Just the logic for not applying the setbacks to the smaller properties. One of them is that we're not sure that if you apply the setbacks, the relaxed setbacks to the very small properties, those properties could get, there are a whole bunch of constraints. In a practical world, the buildings might not get bigger, but you have a huge increase in the buildable area. And that's why some of the commissioners had concerns about big buildings on small properties. I don't mean to speak to the merit of that, just mean to speak to that was the logic behind not allowing those setbacks on the smaller properties, de facto, and having them be part of the mixed use, and then having a trigger on the mixed use. So right or wrong, who knows, but at least there was a logic behind it.
Okay. I think we're done. This part of it. Any public comment on the, I guess not, we already had it. So next is old business. Next is new business. For new business.
Just say one thing about that ordinance.
You missed.
I
Okay,
know this is
go
kind of
ahead.
new business. So I just want to say, I think, I don't want to be dismayed, right? So I think what I've seen tonight and what we saw from Commissioner Curley and what you see kind of here is real progress. And this has come so much further than any other ordinance has been. And I actually think we're making good steps towards getting it right. So we appreciate what you guys are doing, even though, we're fine-tuning it. But to be in the state where we're actually fine-tuning something and not talking so broad brush is really, really promising. And we are encouraged by, I think, the progress we've made tonight. So thank you all for your efforts and kind of sticking with it, and with Commissioner Curley.
Steve, if I could just make one request of the township. If we see this again, and I assume we probably will, can we have the whole ordinance with definitions?
Again, I think what's going to end up happening is I'm going to formulate this into a memo. The timing of this may allow you to see the memo prior to when this is at the board meeting. So you will have another meeting in September prior to this being scheduled for the Board of Commissioners. I believe this was tentatively scheduled September. So regardless.
Would we get the same thing back that we're looking at now?
What you're going to get back would be a memo with all of these points itemized on them. That memo then gets taken up to the Board of Commissioners, and the commissioners will then vote on each bullet point, yay or nay.
Okay.
And then give us further direction. We would then take that further direction with the memo, incorporate that into an actual ordinance. That ordinance would go back to the commissioners, who would then authorize it for dissemination to this planning commission and the county planning commission. And then it would start the ordinance review, a formal ordinance review process, basically all over again, where you would be then looking at a complete ordinance that would be ready for adoption should it get right the first time.
Thank you. We appreciate all the hard work of the Planning Commission, and Lloyd is handing out the letter that Kevin had referenced earlier today that was issued by Fred Fromhold. Just to highlight a few bullet points, we do appreciate that there was some consideration being made for sites less than 10 acres. We do appreciate the inclusion of the Type C use group. We understand the dialogue going on about parking garage. We believe that there should be some wordsmithing in that, in the parking structure language. I won't belabor that. I understand setbacks is a little ambiguous at this point. I know we were very much involved in when Steve Gabriel was putting together the setbacks, and we support the setbacks that Steve had put together. We do feel very strongly about building length, that the 160 feet is not very practical, but 350 feet, subject to some articulations, would be a good length to consider. Fred has chosen to bifurcate use from percentages, and you may want to take a look at how he did that. I think it clarifies some of the things that you guys really struggled with at the early part of this meeting.
Just to touch on that real quick, the concept is there. Ultimately, once the board weighs in on the concept, we're going to go from that general of the percentages that have been recommended by the Planning Commission to the specific with then actual development of the ordinance once we get direction from the board on the general.
Great.
So that is something, the formatting of it is still something to be worked out.
Great, thank you. And that is, that pretty much summarizes my comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have one piece of new business, and that's my piece of business. So I think we, as a board, need to figure out how to get out of here by 10 o'clock at night, so with few exceptions. So tonight was fine. I mean, yeah, I don't mind going over a half hour if we need to, but I think we'll try and figure out, I don't know, maybe we don't, let's talk about this next time. Maybe just don't take anybody unless it's a quick one after 9:30. I mean, that's the cutoff for the last applicant or whatever the case may be. I don't know, but, or maybe we just start giving a little thought to how long each applicant's going to be and how we can stage them or postpone them or have an extra meeting. But anyway, they're my thoughts. So let's look at that as as September rolls around. So maybe we just have an extra meeting and pull one out.
Did we have a June meeting?
No, I don't know. I know we skipped one meeting.
Are we adjourned?
We're adjourned, right? Bye.